Chapter 1384. Heh, you want to sneak up on me? Meg dodged a pink sachet, and walked into the restaurant without looking back. Idiot, he dodged my sachet. Mr. Mac is indeed not a normal man. A young girl stomped her foot shyly. Normal men can't find a wife, but Mr. Mac is different. He's single because of his own ability, Harrison teased when he saw this scene. Ha, Mr. Mac may be single, but there are so many beautiful girls waiting in line for him to nod his head. Besides, he has a little boss, George said with a smile. Stop it. I'm jealous. A horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of Amy's, and Gloria walked out. Her eyes lit up when she saw the long line in front of the restaurant. She murmured to herself, the customers are so happy. Could it be that Mr. Meg is back? She immediately attracted the attention of many customers as soon as she got out of the horse-drawn carriage. Many of the regulars were familiar with this beautiful and dignified young lady. They had heard that she was the young mistress of the family Moreton, the granddaughter of the president of the Aden Chamber of Commerce, and the owner of Suede Clothing. Young and promising, that was probably the best description for someone like her. Suede Clothing had been transformed from a textile workshop, and had become a rising star in the clothing industry in Chaos City in just a few months. It had also become the hottest shop among the socialites. It was said that because of the impact of Suede Clothing, many tailors' business had deteriorated significantly. They no longer had to wait in line for 2 to 3 years just to order a piece of clothing. Gloria smiled faintly when she saw that everyone was looking at her. She walked to the back of the line with a calm expression, and didn't look uncomfortable at all. She was wearing a long white down jacket today. The vertical lines of the jacket made it fluffy, but not bulky, and made her look even more slender. The warm down jacket could get rid of all the bulkiness, and she only needed to wear a light undershirt underneath. Gloria's perfect figure brought out the lines of the down jacket incisively and vividly. The soft texture got rid of the winter bloat and she walked with a different kind of confidence and calmness. This was the new down jacket that Mr. Meg had custom-made for Suede. Gloria wanted to see if Meg would be back so that he could personally confirm the sample. Also, she wanted to make a new one as a preview of the new product. Wow, is this Suede's new product? How can the cotton clothes look so good? No, I'm in love. When are we going to get married? I have to buy one. Hubby, can you lend me your hand? The eyes of the noblewomen in the line had already lit up. The hottest news in the circle recently was, when would Suede's new winter clothes be released? Although it was not a new thing to stuff a thick thermal jacket under one's windbreaker, if Suede could release an official winter clothes, it would definitely cause a stir in the noblewomen's circle in Chaos City. Now, the white jacket that Miss Gloria was wearing naturally became the focus of everyone's attention. Was this the new product from Suede? Miss Gloria, is this beautiful jacket that you're wearing Suede's new product? A noblewoman who was closer to Gloria couldn't help but ask. Yes, this is Suede's new down jacket, Gloria replied with a smile. There was a big commotion in the line. This news was simply too exciting. But what was a down jacket? How was it different from a cotton jacket? Then, when will it be released? That noblewoman asked the question that everyone was most concerned about. Gloria replied with a smile, the first batch is already in production. It will be officially released in about a week. As for the other questions, Gloria couldn't answer them for the time being because the new product hadn't been released yet. Leaving a certain amount of suspense was one of the important marketing strategies. This was what Mr. Meg had said. Amy, are you sure you want to go to school with this hairstyle today? Meg looked at Amy's pigtail. It was in the middle of her head, standing straight up like a lightning rod. This was the hairstyle that Irina had tied for Amy. It was the Teletubbies style. Amy touched her antenna and nodded her little head. Yes, yes. I like this pigtail. As long as you like it. Meg felt Irina's gaze and immediately stopped himself from tying Amy's hair. Luckily, his daughter was cute. Even if she had a Teletubbies hairstyle, she would still be cuter than a Teletubbies. He pushed the bicycle out and sent Amy to school. "Hello, everyone," Amy said with a smile as she jumped out of the door and waved at the customers in line. "Little boss, we missed you so much. Little boss is so cute today." Amy immediately received enthusiastic feedback from the customers. Compared to the resentment they felt towards Meg, everyone sincerely liked Amy. This bunch of superficial people who only care about looks. Meg snorted in his heart. He carried Amy onto the back seat and then put his face in front of Amy in front of everyone. Mwah. Amy kissed Meg's cheek very cooperatively. Then she raised her two little hands and said cutely, "Let's go. Let's go." Meg smiled as he got onto the bicycle and pedaled away. What's the use of liking her? She's my daughter. He left behind a bunch of sour-smelling lemons. It was Meg's first breakfast since his return. The slightly quiet atmosphere in the restaurant for the past few days instantly warmed up. Even the battle between sweet and savory dishes that had stopped for a few days started again. It was a pity that there was no WeChat moments in this world. Otherwise, Meg felt that everyone's moments would be flooded with news of his return. Meg asked Jane to learn from Mia first and help her out when she was busy so that she could adapt to the intensity of the restaurant's work and see what kind of work was suitable for her. There are so many people. Jane looked at the restaurant full of customers. She thought that IE restaurant was already the busiest restaurant on Carapace Island. She didn't expect Amy's to be even busier than IE restaurant. Customers came and went. So many waitresses were busy, but they were still very busy. She could only help out a little. However, compared to Carapace Island, the customers here were very well-mannered and cultured even though they came from different races. They wouldn't talk loudly, and they wouldn't put their feet up on the chairs. Even when they spoke to the waitresses, they were very gentle. You wouldn't see such things on Carapace Island. What a beautiful place. It's completely different from Chaos City in my imagination, Jane thought to herself. She had new expectations for her future life. Chapter 1385. After the morning service, Meg glanced at Gloria, who was sitting in the corner of the restaurant, and said to Yabba Mia, "Take Jane back to the dormitory first. I have expanded the dormitory by a few rooms. Let her choose one that she likes." "Okay." Mia nodded and naturally held Jane's hand. She looked at her and asked, "Jane, is there anything you need to take?" "No." Jane shook her head and glanced at the hand that was held by Mia. The warm feeling from the palm made her heart beat faster, but it also made her feel exceptionally safe and warm. "Then let's go and see the new room that the boss has prepared for you. We will live together in the future." Mia smiled and held Jane's hand and left with Elizabeth and the others. Irina went out after breakfast. There were some things that the night elves needed her to do personally. For example, she needed to integrate the elves that she brought back last night into the night elves team and give them the necessary spiritual baptism so that they could establish their faith and goals again. Therefore, only Meg and Elizabeth were left in the restaurant. Meg brewed a pot of black tea and sat down opposite Gloria with the tea. He poured a cup and placed it in front of Gloria. The bright red tea rippled in the cup and emitted steam. "Thank you." Gloria smiled at Meg. "You're welcome." Meg smiled. Sitting with Gloria was like drinking tea with an old friend. It made him feel comfortable. "The down jacket is very beautiful. It's better than I expected. It looks good on you." Meg looked at Gloria's down jacket and praised. He was worried that the tailor would make it bloated and ugly, but judging from the effect of Gloria's upper body, whether it was the filling of the down jacket or the styling, it was done very well. It basically met all his requirements on the blueprint. Judging from the way the noblewomen stared at Gloria during the meal just now, it would definitely be another piece of clothing that would cause a commotion once it was released. Hearing Meg's praise, Gloria's cheeks flushed, but her expression was still reserved. Mr. Meg's drawings are very accurate and detailed, and the tailors are also very skilled. That's why they can make such excellent clothes. Isn't a boss who can get these two things even better? Meg said with a smile. Gloria's face turned even redder. She bit her lips and didn't know what to say. When will this batch of down jackets hit the market? Meg did not continue to tease her and asked. The first batch is almost complete. After the manual inspection, they will be sent to the shop. However, there are only 50 pieces in the first batch, so they should be sold out soon, Gloria replied. Down jackets have a time limit. Try to produce as many batches as possible before the end of winter. Otherwise, we'll have to wait until next winter. Gloria nodded. The two of them suddenly fell into silence. Because the heater was on in the restaurant, Gloria unbuttoned her down jacket, but her cheeks were still a little pink. She looked at the teacup in front of her. The steam from the black tea was still rising. Where did Mr. Meg go for the past few days? Gloria looked up and asked Meg curiously. She had never been on a long journey before. She only knew about the world outside of Chaos City from books. She had never had the chance to experience it for herself. I went to the Goblins' Vic Mountain. I went all the way north and stopped outside the Wind Forest. I stayed in the mountain for a few days. Meg smiled. He felt a little apologetic. He had to keep his whereabouts a secret, so he could only lie to Gloria. Goblins. Gloria's eyes lit up, and she curiously asked, are their underground caverns really all connected? I've read in the books that there are underground caverns and caves all over Vic Mountain. Without the goblins leading the way, you'll get lost after entering, and you won't be able to find the exit. We didn't enter the underground caverns at Vic Mountain because we were worried about getting lost. However, we did see many underground caverns when we went north, and we even tried to explore them. Meg saw that Gloria was very interested, so he described to her what he saw and heard when he went to rescue the night elves. These were all things that he saw with his own eyes. Although there weren't any thrilling or interesting stories, Gloria still listened with great interest. She even looked at Meg with admiration shining in her eyes. She's really a good listener. Meg sighed in his heart. If he told her about this trip to the Demon Islands, he reckoned he would get a very good response. This is really a thrilling and interesting journey. Gloria couldn't help but praise Meg after hearing about his fictional journey. If Gloria wants to travel to the Goblins' territory, it might become very convenient in the near future. Meg said with a smile as he looked at Gloria, who was looking forward to it. The railway to the Goblins would be connected very soon, and it would be very convenient for them to take the steam locomotive to Vic Mountain from Chaos City. I've never traveled long distances alone before. A hint of hesitation appeared on Gloria's face. I don't recommend you to travel alone either. It's very dangerous for a beautiful lady like you to travel alone. Meg nodded. If she went out alone, she would probably be abducted as soon as she left Chaos City. After all, it was very rare to see such a beautiful lady with such a delicate body. This was ultimately a dangerous world. Gloria was silent for a while before she mustered her courage to look at Meg, and softly said, "Then, Mr. Meg, can you bring me along when you go out to collect materials next time? In that case, I won't be alone." Meg looked at Gloria in shock. He didn't expect her to make such a reasonable request. As a normal man, of course, he would accept a travel invitation from a single beautiful lady without hesitation. However, as a married man with children, Meg calmed himself down in the face of such an unreasonable request. He smiled casually, and said, "Sure. I'll ask Gloria to join us when we go out for a team-building trip next time. Everyone together." A hint of disappointment flashed past Gloria's eyes, but they lit up very quickly. She nodded with a smile, and said, If Mr. Meg invites me, I'll definitely join." The morning tea ended with a pleasant chat. Meg sent Gloria off, and was about to enter when he saw a man in black standing in the corner. "Mr. Meg, the Lord of the Grey Temple would like to invite you over." The man in black passed a black token to Meg. There was the Grey Temple symbol on it. "Okay." Meg raised an eyebrow. Did Roland know something? However, he didn't show it on his face. He put away the token and nodded slightly. He closed the door, hailed a horse-drawn carriage, and went directly to the street next to the Grey Temple's headquarters. After alighting from the carriage, he walked to the Grey Temple. It just so happened that he also wanted to know what changes had happened to this world after they wreaked havoc on the Demon Islands. No pop-up window. Chapter 1386. In the secret chamber of the Grey Temple, Roland and Michael were already waiting in advance. Seeing Meg enter, Michael stood up with a smile, and said, "Mr. Mac, your trip to collect materials has made the world a mess." Meg's eyes flickered slightly as he looked at the smiling Michael and the expressionless Roland. Did they really know something? However, his expression was still calm as he smiled, and said, "Did something happen in the past few days? You're quite good at pretending." The corner of Michael's mouth twitched slightly. The husband and wife had caused such a big incident, and they could still maintain such a standard of acting after returning. Alex had indeed changed. He was no longer the honest young man back then. Roland withdrew his gaze from Meg. From Meg's previous micro-expressions, he could already be sure that he was hiding his emotions. Don't ask him how he knew. If he didn't have this ability, he wouldn't have become the Lord of the Grey Temple. "Oh, you've just returned. I forgot that you're not aware of the situation. In the past few days when you were away, a few big things happened on the Demon Islands. The Demon Alliance, which was originally the strongest in the war, is now in complete chaos." Michael didn't make it clear, and smiled as he gestured for Meg to sit down. Irina and Alex made a move. They killed the Bar Hill, and the horror demons fell into temporary chaos. It's possible that they were the ones who instigated the war between the Abyss demons and the Flaming demons. Within the vampires, there was an irreparable rift between the Barta family and the royal family because of the succession of the vampire ancestor. There were also many conflicts and disputes among the other demon clans. The War Alliance formed previously only existed in name. I didn't expect that the demons that worried us were dealt with so easily. Alex and Princess Irina are really two great people. Meg said with a look of realization and surprise, but there was some suspicion in his eyes. How did Michael and the rest know that he and Irina were the ones who instigated the war between the Abyss demons and the Flaming demons? Listen, is this what a human is saying? Who praises themselves like that? Michael pursed his lips slightly, but continued with a smile, "That's right, they've made very outstanding contributions to world peace. We're also preparing to formally meet them, and we're going to invite Mr. Meg to meet them with us." Meg raised his eyebrows. "Let him see him. Is this a test?" A hint of hesitation appeared in Meg's eyes as he looked at Michael. Even though he was sure that Chaos City and Michael were on the side that he trusted and was willing to stand on, he had to admit that everything that he had done had been perfectly planned. Therefore, he was still a little displeased that his plan had been seen through so easily. "It would be my honor to meet them." Meg smiled and nodded. "Well, Alex won't see you stupid mortals anyway." "Oh, yes. If the war between the Abyss Demons and the Flaming Demons was instigated by Irina and Alex, will this bring trouble to Chaos City? Meg asked after some thought. We gave Irina and Alex an alibi on the night of the duel between Simmons and Alfred. Regarding the war between the Abyss Demons and the Flaming Demons, apart from us, no one would suspect Irina and Alex, Roland explained. I see. Meg's brows gradually relaxed. He didn't expect to have such an outstanding wingman. With Chaos City cleaning up after them, they didn't have to worry about causing trouble even if there were any loopholes in their plan. Because they weren't powerful enough, and their status was a little special, Chaos City should be the largest and most powerful in terms of the construction of their intelligence network. It could be seen from the confidential information that they had collected that their intelligence network had completely penetrated into the internal affairs of all the races and forces. The multiracial environment had created a special intelligence network that no single race could compare to. However, this also made Meg suspect that Michael and Roland might have already guessed his identity, or at least suspected him. However, since they didn't say it out loud, and even helped to clean up the mess, Meg naturally wouldn't jump out and admit it. This kind of feeling was also quite good. Everyone was well aware of it. If they didn't make it clear, they could still chat as they pleased. If there was any information that they wanted to disclose, they could also communicate through normal channels. It wouldn't affect their normal lives. This is the intelligence that the Great Temple received from the various races recently, as well as some confidential documents that were previously made available to you. If you're interested, you can take a look at them. Roland took out a black wooden box from under the table, and pushed it in front of Meg gently. I'm very interested. Meg placed his hand on the box, and his eyes lit up. First-hand information was exactly what he needed. Furthermore, what came as a surprise to him was that Michael and Roland had given him a higher level of authority, and had even given him confidential documents. After this incident, the demons shouldn't be able to form a unified voice in the racial peace talks. The threat of war has been temporarily removed. Michael looked at Meg with a smile, and said, Mr. Meg, which racist problem do you think we should solve next? Meg looked at Michael, and pondered for a while before saying, I think it should be the orcs. The August tribe helped Gary to rebel and control the peace-loving Falk tribe, and made the orcs a powerful race that was led by the pro-war voices. However, the internal suppression of the Falk tribe hasn't been completed yet. Gary hasn't been able to control the tribe well, and the princess of the Falk tribe is wandering outside. This might be a breakthrough point for us to break the orcs' main battle line. This is indeed a very good breakthrough point. However, we still haven't been able to find Princess Connie of the Falk tribe. Moreover, Gary has basically completed the bloody suppression, and wiped out many orcs who were loyal to the former chief. He is gradually controlling the Falk tribe, Roland said with a frown. As the Kingslayer, Gary doesn't have the right to do so. Even if he uses the bloody suppression to temporarily control the Falk tribe, this method will only cause more chaos at the right time. Meg shook his head with a smile. Moreover, I know where Princess Connie is. Oh. Michael and Roland looked surprised at the same time. This was indeed out of their expectations. Meg shrugged, and explained, I saved an orc girl who was being hunted down previously. I only found out that she was Princess Connie after that. She is now working as a salted fish delivery person in my restaurant. She is learning from the deputy warden of the Bawtai prison, the hairless monk, and is working hard to become a killer without a sense of direction. Michael's lips twitched, and he said with a weird expression, Mr. Mack, you are really a princess harvester. Chapter 1387. City Lord, don't spout nonsense. Although the princess is good, you can't drink too much, Meg quickly said seriously. God knew that even the service staff he picked up was a princess. There were even some who came from the heavens, and some who weren't princesses at first, but became princesses later on. he couldn't count them in detail. He couldn't count them anymore. Meg then chatted with Michael and the rest about the construction of the railway to Vic Mountain. The first phase of the 200-kilometer railway had been completed, and connected Chaos City to Tatari, an important town in the south of the Goblins. The construction and debugging of the locomotive were also basically completed. He planned to invite Meg to the base for the final trial run to ensure that it could enter the trial run stage as soon as possible. After the conversation ended, Meg bade farewell and prepared to leave. Michael went out with Meg and curiously asked, "Mr. Mac, you've been out collecting materials for so many days. What new product are you preparing to launch today?" "Crayfish," Meg replied with a smile. "Sounds like a pretty good seafood," Michael said with a smile. "Yes. I've put in a lot of effort to get this crayfish." Meg nodded in agreement. Perhaps the chaos on the Demon Islands this time could be renamed as the War of the Crayfish. "I must go and try it when I have time," Michael said in advance. "Anytime." Meg nodded with a smile. Meg left the Grey Temple's side door with the wooden box. He only flagged down a horse-drawn carriage when he reached the street next door. This long conversation lasted for 2 hours. He had to rush back to the restaurant to prepare for the lunch service. The horse-drawn carriage turned into the long street. Meg was about to put down the curtains when he suddenly noticed Raina, who was supporting an old lady by the side of the street. He quickly got the coachman to stop the carriage by the side. "Raina," Meg called out to Raina as he lifted the curtains. Raina looked around before noticing Meg, who was sitting in the carriage. Her eyes lit up, and she asked, "Boss, why are you here?" "I came out to do something and happened to see you," Meg said with a smile, and then his eyes fell on the old lady, or rather, a middle-aged woman, who was supported by Raina. However, because she was very thin, her hair was half white, and she wore a cotton coat full of patches. Her hunched figure made her look like an old woman in her twilight years. Her face was sickly pale, and her appearance was somewhat similar to Raina. He quickly said, "Hello, you must be Raina's mother." "Mother, this is my boss, Mr. Meg." Raina hurriedly introduced. "Hello, Mr. Meg. Thank you very much for taking care of Raina. She often talks about you." Karen's looked at Meg with a gentle smile. Although the smile was a little difficult, it still made people feel warm. Raina is a very good employee. Her ability is very good and outstanding. I should thank you for cultivating such an excellent daughter. Meg said modestly, and then said, "Do you live nearby?" "No, we live in the north of the city. Today, I brought my mother to see a doctor. Now, I am going to send her home, and then I will immediately rush to the restaurant." Raina shook her head and said apologetically, "I may be late, but I will try my best to run over." "Raina, you don't have to send me. I can walk back slowly. You should hurry to work. Don't delay the restaurant's business." Karen's let go of Raina's hand and said somewhat sternly, "But mother, your body." Raina looked at Karen's with a worried face. "The doctor said there is no big problem. You can go to work without worry." Karen's interrupted Raina's words with a firm tone. "Actually, I am not here to urge you to go to work." Meg was a little flustered in his heart. Why did he suddenly feel that he had become an unscrupulous boss? However, poverty did not make Raina bad. It was probably because of such a family education. "Madam, get in the car. I will send you home." Meg got out of the car and looked at Karen's with a smile. "How can this be? Mr. Meg is so busy. You can't waste time on a useless person like me." Karen's quickly shook her head. "If I don't send you home, Raina will definitely be very worried about you. Then, you can't work well." Meg looked at Karen's with a smile and said softly, "The carriage will send you home soon." We will go to the restaurant together. It won't take much time. Boss. Raina looked at Meg. Her eyes were slightly red. This. Karen's looked at Raina and then looked at Meg. She was a little hesitant. Madam, get in the car. It is rare to meet such a kind boss. The coachman had already helped to move the wooden ladder down and said with a smile. Then, I will trouble you. Karen's was afraid that she would waste Meg's time if she continued to delay. She thanked him and slowly got into the carriage with Raina's help. Meg also climbed into the carriage again. He put down the curtain and immediately isolated the cold air outside. Raina, tell the coachman the address. Meg said to Raina. Okay. Raina nodded. She lifted the curtain and told the coachman the address. The carriage then turned around and headed to the north of the city. I am really sorry for the trouble. Karen's looked at Meg sitting opposite her. She was still a little embarrassed. You are an elder. This small matter is what I should do. If I knew that Raina would accompany you to see a doctor today, I definitely wouldn't let her come to work today. Meg hurriedly comforted her. He did blame himself for the negligence of his employee's life. Karen still wanted to say something. Suddenly, she covered her mouth with a handkerchief and coughed violently. Raina quickly stroked Karen's back. Her eyes were full of worry. Meg looked at Clarence, who was coughing so hard that her face was red. It seemed that she was in great pain every time she coughed. His brows furrowed slightly. It seemed like Clarence's condition wasn't as simple as she had said. After a while, Karen stopped coughing. Meg still saw a trace of blood on the handkerchief in her hand. I am sorry to let you sit in the same carriage as me. Karen's looked at Meg apologetically. She didn't know where to put her hands because of nervousness. Your words make me a little scared. You are Raina's mother, which means you are my elder. I hope I didn't burden you. Meg said apologetically. Karen's looked at Meg and smiled. You are a true gentleman. I am very happy that Raina can meet a boss like you. The carriage stopped, and Meg and Raina helped Karen's out of the carriage. Meg's heart sank when he saw the shabby and leaky building in the slums. For a patient, living in such a place would make her condition worse. Furthermore, the restaurant was almost across the entire Chaos City. It was hard to imagine how long Raina had to walk to the restaurant every morning and walk back here alone after she finished her morning work. Although Chaos City was safe, the slums at night were still very dangerous for a young girl. Raina, you and your mother can move to the staff dormitory. I have prepared a dormitory for you, Meg said to Raina, who was sitting opposite him, on the carriage. Daddy's Otherworldly Restaurant. Daddy's Otherworldly Restaurant. Chapter 1388. Raina stared blankly at Meg for a moment, then quickly waved her hand and said, No need, boss. It's fine if we live here. When the next month's salary is paid, I can bring my mother and rent a new place. She knew that Mia and the others lived in the dormitory that Meg provided for them, but she had her mother with her. If she lived with them, they would definitely feel uncomfortable. She still had to brew medicine for her mother. The staff dormitory is one of the employee benefits. This is what you should enjoy. Considering that you live with your mother, I will arrange a small suite for you. This way, it will be more convenient for you. Meg looked at Raina with a smile and said in an unquestionable tone, If you refuse, I will feel that I am not a good boss. Raina looked at Meg and slightly opened her mouth. Looking at that gentle smile, it was as if the softest part of her heart had been touched. She nodded lightly and said, Thank you very much. After the lunch service, I will call a carriage for you to pick up your mother. The dormitory is very complete. You only need to bring the important things. Meg said with a smile. Reina was a girl with a sensitive heart, so he planned to give her and her mother a cozy suite. It would not inconvenience the lives of young girls like Mia and the others. Okay. Reina nodded and secretly made up her mind to work hard and repay the boss. When they passed by the ice cream shop on the way back, Meg stopped the carriage and paid the coachman. He took Reina to the back of the ice cream shop and went up the stairs to the second floor. There was another door beside the original staff dormitory. This is your and your mother's residence. This is Mia's dormitory. In the future, you will be neighbors, so it will be more convenient for you to visit each other. Meg took out the key and opened the door. It was a small suite of about 40 square meters. The layout was relatively compact, but it was very complete with a kitchen, dining room, living room, bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. The beige decoration style made the house look warm. Without the fancy decorations, the minimalist style made the limited space to the maximum. Visually, it didn't make people feel narrow and crowded. The floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room made the room very bright. There was a vase on the small dining table for 2 with a bouquet of carnations. Reina stood at the door and looked at the luxurious room in her eyes. She stopped. Don't you want to come in and take a look? Meg looked back at Reina, who was still standing at the door, and asked with a smile. Boss, I think it's too luxurious. I can't live in such a luxurious place. Reina shook her head and said with some hesitation. Our restaurant staff dormitories are all of this standard. You have contributed delicious food and excellent service to the guests and earned a very high income for the restaurant. This is what you deserve. Meg said with a smile. He walked to the door and directly pulled Reina's wrist into the room. You may not have lived in such a strange house, so there are some things I have to explain to you first. This is the kitchen. The standard of the stove is a miniature version of the restaurant's current one. The knives are here, the tableware is in the cabinet below, and this is the condiment box. Also, this thing is called a fridge. If there's anything that you haven't finished eating or something that needs to be preserved at a low temperature, you can put it in the fridge to keep it fresh. This will be very useful in summer. Meg brought Reina around the house and explained to her how to use all the electrical appliances and things that she needed to take note of. Reina memorized everything Meg said, but still looked around with surprise. She sighed in her heart. So this is how the rich people's house looks like. But why have I never seen these things before? Even in the previous boss's house, I've never seen these things before. It's about time. We should go back to the restaurant. Meg raised his hand to look at his watch. It was already 10:30 p.m. If they didn't go back now, the lunch service would be affected. After all, it was the first day of their return. After the news in the morning was released, there would probably be many customers at noon. Sure enough, before Meg reached the restaurant, he already saw a long line in front of the restaurant. There's still an hour before the restaurant opens. There are already so many customers in line. Reina was also a little surprised to see the dozens of customers who had already lined up in an orderly manner. This is probably the charm of the new product, Meg said with a smile. He walked to the entrance of the restaurant and saw many familiar faces in the line. For example, George was in the line today with his family. Miranda was holding their 1-month-old daughter, while George was holding Angus in one hand and Parbert in the other. He could be considered a full-fledged stay-at-home dad. Meg looked at the big family with a smile and said, "Will Palmer be sad if he finds out that you left him here for lunch?" "It's all right. I've already told him to come to the school gate after school. The coachman will send him to the restaurant. Mr. Mack is launching a new product today, so we definitely have to come and support him," George said with a smile. "Thank you for coming, then." Meg smiled as he gently stroked the face of the little princess in Miranda's arms. The little girl was sleeping soundly. Amy would definitely like to see her later. A few days ago, she had even told her that she was going to see Palmer's little sister. Mr. Mac, we're coming too. Vanessa waved at Meg. Abraham looked at Meg with a hint of resentment and said, Mr. Mac, everything I ate tasted bland when you weren't around. Is that so? I heard that the Duke had been eating hot pot for a few days. Meg didn't believe him. Ahem, of course hot pot is the first choice. After all, in Chaos City, only your new chef, Miss Raina, can make something that's on par with Mr. Mac's. Abraham coughed awkwardly, and didn't forget to give Raina a thumbs up. Raina blushed, but she felt a sense of accomplishment. Raina is indeed an excellent chef. Meg nodded with a smile. He liked employees who could take charge of things on their own. This gave him the opportunity to be a hands-off boss. Mr. Mac, look, my teeth are much better now. Can I start eating spicy hot pot now? Vanessa asked Meg with her teeth bared. Meg looked at Vanessa's teeth. Compared to before, the black color had indeed decreased a lot. Some areas had already regained their white color. If she kept her teeth a little, it wouldn't affect her beauty anymore. Eat clear soup hot pot for a while more. After the black color is removed, it's time to fill the holes. It won't be too late for you to eat spicy hot pot when your teeth are completely healed. Meg shook his head. He had almost forgotten about the mission to repair Vanessa's teeth. Although he was in awe of the durian pizza, which was a dark cuisine, he didn't want to face the punishment for failing the mission. Chapter 1389. Do I still need to eat for a while longer? Vanessa was discouraged. She thought that she would be free after Mr. Meg came back, but she still couldn't eat. Meg thought for a while and said, come to the restaurant at around 2:00 today. I'll call 2 experts to evaluate your teeth and see if there's a way to fix them. Okay. Vanessa's eyes lit up. The people who were called experts by Mr. Mac must be very capable. Maybe they could fix her teeth in an instant. Then she would be able to eat everything. Meg greeted the regulars and led Raina into the restaurant. In the kitchen, Phyllis and Camilla had already started to prepare the ingredients needed for lunch. The two of them had different styles of cutting vegetables, but they were equally efficient. There were already piles of ingredients by the side, and they could use them directly when cooking later. Meg went upstairs and changed into a clean chef's uniform. He put on an apron, washed his hands, and started making the tofu pudding. He had to make tofu pudding for 400 people this afternoon. The workload was a little higher than usual, but it was just an increase. It wasn't a big problem. Rena was looking at Mag seriously at the side. She could clearly feel those women's fanatical love for tofu pudding these few days. She liked tofu pudding too. Not only was it delicious, but it also had a very good restorative effect on the skin. Meg saw that Rena was looking at him seriously, so he explained as he cooked. The process of making tofu pudding seems complicated, but it's actually not difficult after mastering it. You just have to grasp the right timing. Not long after, Mia and the others also came to the restaurant. Mia walked to the entrance of the restaurant and looked at Meg curiously. Boss, what's the new dish you're launching today? Can you reveal it now? The new dish we're launching today is braised crayfish. Sit down and wait for lunch. We'll have this dish for lunch, Meg said with a smile. Braised crayfish. Everyone was a little confused, but more than that, they were looking forward to it. After all, they never understood how the boss named the dishes. Then I want to eat too. 2 big prawns. Amy had just come back from school. She ran up and raised her little hand. Okay. Meg nodded and grabbed a few crayfish from the fish tank in the corner. The crayfish that the system supplied directly from the breeding base were obviously much cleaner than the ones caught by the fishermen. There was no sand or stains at all. After washing them with clean water, they could be cooked directly. What a big crayfish! The girls looked at the 1 kilogram crayfish in Meg's hand and were surprised. Compared to the prawns used to make Yangzhou fried rice, this crayfish was huge. Is this a shrimp caught from the sea? It has the aura of the ocean, Gina asked curiously. Yes, crayfish that grow in the sea. Meg nodded with a smile. He picked up the fat head fish from the knife rack and began to cut open the back of the crayfish to remove its veins. The expansion of the designated hot pot area last time had doubled the size of the kitchen. There was a lot of empty space. Therefore, it didn't seem crowded even when 3 big pots were set up in the kitchen. Meg decided to postpone the release of the 3 crayfish flavors that were released in the Demon Islands. If the flavors were too similar, it would be equivalent to self-destruction. Luckily, he still had 3 crayfish flavors that he could make now. He planned to release the braised crayfish at noon, steamed crayfish, and chilled crayfish later. He would consider releasing the ma shao, minced garlic, and 13 spices after the Demon Islands incident was over. The braising technique of the braised crayfish would determine if the crayfish dish could reach the standard of deliciousness. The processed crayfish was set aside. The rapeseed oil was poured into the hot pot. When the oil was 70% hot, the spices were added. After stirring slightly, the fragrance of the spices began to spread. At this time, the processed crayfish was poured in and stirred quickly. The greenish-black shell of the crayfish gradually turned red and a faint fragrance began to spread. At this time, the beer was poured into the crayfish. Without adding a drop of water, he quickly covered the pot with the lid and started to braise. The braising process was to allow the spices to penetrate the crayfish meat perfectly. This process took a very long time. When the gravy was almost completely absorbed, the pot lid was removed. The fresh fragrance instantly bloomed like a delicacy bomb exploding in the kitchen and gushing out. It smells so good. The eyes of the customers who were waiting for lunch lit up one after another. The fresh fragrance that could be smelled was a wonderful fragrance that was hard to resist. Meg shook the big pot lightly and let the gravy at the bottom of the pot dry completely. Only then did he ladle the crayfish into the pot. The crayfish were ladled onto the plate one by one. Unlike the spicy crayfish that was wrapped in the red soup oil, the braised crayfish had a rather dry appearance. The spices on the back of the crayfish were painted with wonderful colors and the plump crayfish meat made people drool. This is our lunch today. Meg ladled the last crayfish onto the plate and said with a smile. I can't wait to try it. I think it will be a wonderful taste, Mia said with a look of anticipation. Barbara waved her small hand, and the plates with the crayfish floated up one by one and gently landed on the large hotpot table next door. Irina just happened to come back. She walked to the table and took a look. She was a little surprised and said, "This crayfish, did they change the cooking method again?" "Yes. Today's dish is braised crayfish. Wash your hands and we can start eating." Meg nodded and gestured for everyone to sit down and eat. Meg sat down and looked at the table full of people. Unknowingly, Amy's had become a big family. The entire table was filled to the brim, and aside from Sally, everyone was present. "I'm going to start eating," Amy said. Then, she grabbed a pincer as big as her little hand and sucked a little of the gravy in the gap. Then, she forcefully pried open the shell of the pincer, which had been cracked in advance. The plump crayfish meat, which was stained red by the gravy, was easily taken out. Amy opened her mouth wide and took a big bite. Her big blue eyes suddenly lit up, and she happily chewed on the crayfish meat. The crayfish meat filled with gravy made a soft chewing sound, as if it was accompanied by a beautiful movement. Gulp. Everyone subconsciously swallowed their saliva. Amy's eating was really too delicious. Watching her eat was a kind of enjoyment and also a kind of torture. Fortunately, there was also a crayfish in front of them. Amy swallowed the crayfish meat in her mouth, then looked at Meg and said, "This big crayfish is so delicious. After eating this one, I want to eat another one." "Okay, I'll keep it for you. You can eat it later and show it to the uncles and aunties waiting in line outside." Meg nodded with a smile. When new things appeared, there was always a need for an expert. As an excellent food taster, Amy was the perfect person to show the customers how to elegantly eat a crayfish. Chapter 1390. After waiting for so many days, Mr. Mac is finally back. I'm really looking forward to the new product he's launching today. Didn't anyone get any news from Mr. Meg in advance? What's the new product he's launching this time? There's no announcement, and he didn't reveal the name of the dish in advance. Mr. Mac has kept it very mysterious this time. There was already a long line of customers at the entrance, which extended all the way to the park. The customers were all discussing the new product with curiosity. "What I'm most concerned about is if I can still eat the tofu pudding at this position," a lady at the end of the line said worriedly. "No problem. Mr. Meg said that from today onwards, he will provide 400 servings of tofu pudding for every meal. You happen to be number 399, the lady in front of her said with a smile. "That's great." That lady's eyes lit up. Being able to eat the tofu pudding was more important than anything else. Meanwhile, the ladies behind her became nervous. They could only pray that not every man in front of them ordered a serving of tofu pudding. As for the ladies, if it wasn't for this tofu pudding that could beautify one's looks, not many ladies would be willing to wait in line for such a long time. Ding-ling. The bell on the restaurant's door rang. The customers all looked over in surprise. It wasn't opening hours yet, was it? Mia walked out with a stool and a small stool in her hands. She placed them in front of the restaurant's door one after the other, and then returned to the restaurant without saying a word. The customers were all puzzled. They didn't know what Miss Mia was doing. Right at this moment, the restaurant's door was pushed open again. Amy walked out with a big plate in her hands. She placed the plate on the stool, and then sat on the small stool. Ugly Duckling followed her out and sat beside Amy, looking up at the plate. What a big prawn! The customers' gazes were all attracted by the big prawn on Amy's plate. The bright red crayfish was bigger than Amy's head. Even the two big pincers were bigger than Amy's palms. They had never seen such a huge prawn in Chaos City. Could this be Mr. Mac's new product? So, is Little Boss's new product tasting session coming again? In order to promote the new product, Mr. Mac is becoming more and more unscrupulous. His behavior is simply indecent. The customers were whispering, but there was no anger on their faces. Instead, they were looking at Amy expectantly. Although this had become a regular feature of the launch of a new product, they still enjoyed watching the little boss eat. Look, what a big prawn! Amy grabbed the crayfish on the plate with both hands and raised it high to show everyone how domineering the crayfish was. Gulp! Just looking at the bright red prawns, some customers couldn't help but swallow their saliva. As for the customers standing in the front row, they had to endure the invasion of the fragrance. The fresh fragrance slowly drifted over, making them feel as if they had smelled the scent of the sea. Crassus's and Julian's throats moved at the same time. They looked at each other and snorted at the same time, continuing to act like experts. Then, I'll start eating. Amy put down the crayfish, and twisted off one of the pincers as usual. She peeled off the shell skillfully with her little hands, and then showed the plump pincer meat to everyone. Amy opened her mouth wide and took a big bite of the crayfish meat. Her cheeks were puffed up, and the soft sounds of chewing could be heard, perfectly displaying the tenderness and crispness of the crayfish meat. The blissful smile on her little face, and the habitual swaying of her upper body from side to side, made the customers swallow their saliva uncontrollably. A plump pincer was quickly eaten by Amy. She reached out to twist off the crayfish's head, and showed everyone the crayfish's brain that was full of crayfish butter. She picked up the long spoon at the edge of the plate, and scooped out a whole spoonful of crayfish butter from the crayfish's brain. She mumbled to herself, "Stupid crayfish, I'm going to eat your brain." After saying that, she put the whole spoonful of crayfish butter into her mouth. The delicious crayfish butter made Amy close her eyes involuntarily. She felt the crayfish butter melt in her mouth, as if it was jumping on the tip of her tongue. After swallowing, she sighed softly, opened her eyes again, and scooped out another spoonful of crayfish butter to put into her mouth. "Who am I? Why do I have to suffer such torture here?" A customer standing in the front row said with a hopeless expression. "Mr. Mac is too much, isn't he? Didn't he promise not to use Little Boss first?" Harrison swallowed his saliva violently. Looking at the remaining crayfish on Amy's plate, he had some ideas. After scooping out the crayfish's brain, Amy didn't forget to take a bite. Only then did she grab the crayfish, and with a gentle force from the opening, the shell and the meat were perfectly separated. The meat, which was as thick as her arm, was peeled off just like that. The plump meat was soaked in the gravy and turned into a golden red color. There was a hint of oil on it, but it didn't look greasy at all. The entrance of the restaurant gradually quieted down. The customers looked at the crayfish meat in Amy's hand, and everyone knew that the main event was coming. Amy held the crayfish meat with both hands as if she was holding a breadstick. She put it to her mouth and took a big bite, then chewed happily. Although they didn't taste it with their own mouths, the customers could already feel the feeling of the crayfish meat blooming in their mouths. That wonderful taste, that incredible chewing feeling, they were already salivating uncontrollably. Even that dignified noblewoman couldn't help but swallow. Harrison touched his growling stomach and coughed softly, intending to say something. "Little Amy, is this crayfish meat delicious?" Crassus beat him to it with a smile. Sir, are you stealing my line?" Harrison glared, but after taking a look at this sir, he was indeed a real sir. He swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. "Master Crassus, do you want to know?" Amy swallowed the crayfish meat in her mouth, looked up at Crassus, and asked. Crassus coughed softly and said calmly, "Actually, I don't really want to know, but if it's little Amy, you must let me try. Smell it. It's super fragrant." Amy stood up and put the crayfish meat in her hand in front of Crassus for a while. Then, she took it back and sat back on the stool. She looked at him and asked, "Do you smell it?" Crassus's expression froze, but when he looked at Amy's innocent expression, he couldn't help but squeeze out a smile. He nodded and said, "It smells really good." What could he do? This was his disciple. He was the one who asked the question, and his answer was so impeccable. "Ha!" Julian laughed mercilessly. He breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Luckily, he held back. Chapter 1391. No matter what this crayfish is called, I'm going to eat it for lunch today. I have to admit that Mr. Mac is indeed a top chef and a marketing genius. He has successfully attracted my attention to this crayfish. Looks like this crayfish and beer will go well together. The customers' expectations were completely stirred up by Amy. They watched Amy eat the crayfish while waiting for the restaurant to officially open for business. "Boss, you're so naughty." Mia couldn't help but laugh at the anxious customers. "Looks like the crayfish will become another best-selling delicacy in the restaurant without much introduction and promotion," Shirley said with a smile. "The crayfish is so delicious. The customers will definitely like it, Gina said softly. Although she had lived in the sea since she was young, she had never eaten such delicious crayfish. She didn't know where Mr. Meg found this kind of crayfish. How can you say that it's naughty? I just asked Amy to explain it to them. Otherwise, the customers who see the crayfish for the first time will have trouble eating it, Meg said seriously. It was rare to see such a considerate boss like him. 1,000 copper coins for one crayfish. Irina picked up a menu and looked at the price of the crayfish. She looked at Meg in surprise. The price of a product is not only determined by its value, but also by its rarity. It also has the characteristic of having a high premium. Meg said calmly. The price of a crayfish from the system was 100 copper coins per crayfish. Although his price of 1,000 copper coins was a little overpriced, it wasn't a big problem. After all, this was a crayfish that weighed 1 kilogram. Ordinary people would be full after eating one crayfish. Even the Australian crayfish in his previous life cost more than 600 copper coins to buy alive. After processing it with his superb culinary skills, was 1,000 copper coins expensive? It was indeed a little expensive. Who would pay 1,000 copper coins for a crayfish? Get ready. We're going to open for business soon. Meg looked at the clock on the wall. There were still 5 minutes before the restaurant's official business hours. Jane walked up and whispered to Meg, "Boss, what should I do for lunch?" The restaurant was so busy, and she wanted to help out. Otherwise, she would feel like an idler if she only helped out occasionally. Meg thought for a while and said, "Jane, you'll be in charge of helping Anna collect money at noon. She'll be very busy at noon, and collecting money is very important. Anna won't be able to do it alone." "Yes," Jane replied. Anna looked at Jane and smiled. "Then, big sister Jane, I'll leave it to you." Jane also nodded with a smile. Anna was small, but she was very good at calculating. However, the restaurant was so busy. She had to calculate, collect, and give the change. It was indeed a little too busy. She could help share some of the burden. "Let's start." Meg tidied up his chef's uniform. After confirming that there were no problems, he reached out and opened the door to the restaurant. Looking at the hundreds of customers lined up outside, he smiled and said, "Welcome to Amy's." The customers looked at Meg standing upright at the door and the open door of the restaurant. They suddenly felt as if the clouds had cleared and the sun had finally come out. The door was finally open. Amy also finished eating the last pincer. She looked up at Meg with a satisfied smile and said, "Father, I've finished eating. I'm so full." "Well, Amy, you're really enjoying it." Meg smiled dotingly and touched Amy's head. Every time he saw the little girl's happy and satisfied smile when she ate, he felt a great sense of accomplishment. Money could no longer move him. Amy was the strongest motivation for him to continue on the path of becoming the god of cookery. He had promised her that he would make a big table of Manchu Han imperial feast for her. Before this small goal was achieved, of course, he would not give up easily. The customers entered the restaurant in order. Meg smiled and responded to the customers who took the initiative to greet him. He could remember the name of every customer, which was probably the reason why the customers were willing to come here often. "Is this the braised crayfish that little boss ate just now? 1,000 copper coins for one. It's a little expensive." The customers took their seats, and soon noticed the additional crayfish dish on the menu, as well as the price at the back. Many customers immediately dismissed the idea of trying it. 1,000 copper coins was not a small amount. It was enough to eat a few rojiamos and tofu puddings. "I think the price is quite reasonable. One crayfish is enough to fill our stomachs. With a glass of beer, it should be a very interesting combination," Harrison said with a smile after taking a look at the menu at the table with George's family. I agree with your pairing. George nodded in agreement. He then looked at Miranda and the children and asked, what would you like to eat? I also want a crayfish. Parmer raised his hand. Parber raised his little hand and repeated, ice cream. I want ice cream. Parber, you can't eat ice cream before dinner. Miranda took back Parber's hand and said, I also want to try that crayfish. Little Amy seems to be enjoying it very much. I'm curious what it tastes like. Parber and Angus can eat with me. Anyway, the crayfish is so big. I can't finish it. Okay. George nodded. Mia happened to come over, so they ordered 4 crayfish, 2 glasses of beer, and 6 tofu puddings. Angus, can we eat the tofu pudding now? After ordering, Harrison looked at Angus, who was focused on biting his finger, in surprise. Mr. Mack said we can eat a little, but the children can't eat too much, George said with a smile. The children's usefulness is fully displayed at this moment. Harrison sighed. The little one in Miranda's arms was biting on a cork pacifier, and looking around curiously with her big eyes. This was the first time she was brought out. Hello, little Christy. Amy walked up and stood on her tiptoes to look at the baby in Miranda's arms, and greeted her with a smile. Yup. The little one's eyes fell on Amy's face, and her big round eyes lit up. The cork pacifier fell out, and she opened her little arms to Amy as if she wanted to be hugged. Do you want a hug? I really don't know what to do with you. Amy sighed, and looked at Miranda. Auntie Miranda, can I hug little sister? Of course. Miranda nodded with a smile, and handed Christy carefully to Amy. She smiled and said, Christy won't even take the initiative to ask for a hug from her father. I didn't expect her to be so proactive with little Amy. Because I'm a pretty big sister. Amy hugged Christy, and gently kissed her cheek. Christy immediately smiled happily. I also want a kiss and a hug from pretty big sister. Parber stood up from the chair, and opened his arms to Amy with a pout. But I don't want to. Amy looked at him and rejected him seriously. Chapter 1392. Parber raised his hands in a daze. Then, his little face scrunched up, and he burst into tears. As he cried, he sobbed, Why can't I be a cute little sister? I want to be a cute little sister. George apologized to the customers beside him awkwardly as he carried Parber with a dark expression and consoled him. Don't cry, Parber. Let father hug you. Father, I want to be a little sister too. Parber snuggled in George's arms, and gradually stopped crying. He felt wronged and expectant. It's useless. Even if you become a little sister, you'll still be rejected because you're not cute enough, Parmer analyzed calmly. Yeah. Look at how cute Christy is. She's so pink and tender, just like a little elf. Amy nodded as she teased Christy with a funny face. Wah, no. I want to be cute too. I want a big sister to hug me too. Parber, who had just rested, couldn't help but cry again. There were tears on his face, and he was extremely sad. I'll bring the child out to play for a while. Let's go first, George said to Miranda helplessly. He was at his wit's end now. The little boss simply didn't give him a chance to coax the child. If the child made a ruckus, it would affect the other customers' meals. That wasn't good. Let me see. Which little cutie wants a hug? Right at this moment, a gentle voice sounded, and a colorful bubble floated over. There was a colorful fish swimming happily in the bubble, and it stopped in front of Parber. Parber's attention was instantly attracted by the bubble fish. His eyes widened, and he stared at the bubble in disbelief. Little cutie, let big sister hug you, okay? Big sister will bring you to see the fish that can fly. Gina walked up and blew gently at the bubble. The bubble with the fish wrapped in it immediately spun around Parber's head. She looked at Parber and said gently, "Don't worry about it." Parber's attention was completely attracted by the bubble and the fish. On top of that, this big sister looked super gentle. He nodded without thinking, and allowed Gina to carry him. "I'll play with the child for a while." "Please have a meal," Gina said to George with a smile. She carried Parber and chased the bubbles to the children's play area. In the small play area, there were already 5 or 6 children playing with the bubble fish. They didn't cry or make a fuss, and many parents felt relieved. "Luckily, there's Miss Gina." George heaved a sigh of relief. She could always make the crying children quiet for a second. "Christy," Miranda said, "Miss Amy's," and Gina said, "Gina, Amy's eyes." Amy's eyes also lit up. She greeted Miranda and carried Chris to the children's area. "Gina, Gina, 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 Gina into Assis. Gina S Gina, S Gina, Gina Ina, Gina to, Gina, Gled, Gina, Gina, little Amy is such a kind-hearted child." Miranda looked at this scene with a smile. Yes, little boss is a little angel. Although she's a little straightforward with Parber, she's as kind as Mr. Mac. George nodded with a smile. He didn't take Parber's crying to heart at all. Little angel. Parber rested his chin on one hand, and looked at Amy's back thoughtfully. The customers ordered their food one after another. Those who could accept the price of 1,000 copper coins per crayfish ordered one without hesitation. After all, Mr. Mac went out to collect ingredients for 5 days to create this dish. They were already looking forward to it when they saw little boss try it. "Your crayfish." Mia came out with a big tray, and placed 4 servings of crayfish in front of Vanessa, Abraham, and the other 3. Although Randy came a little late, he was still able to share a table with them. "Wow, this crayfish is really huge. Its head is even bigger than my palm," Vanessa exclaimed as she compared it with her hand. Randy sized up the huge crayfish in front of him, and said, "Only the sea can produce such huge crayfish. Once it leaves the sea, it will die very quickly. I wonder how Mr. Mac managed to transport this crayfish to Chaos City in such a perfect condition. If it's chilled, it would have to be transported by a flying steed to maintain its texture. Just the transportation cost alone is extremely expensive, and there's no way to prevent it from dying on the way. I've never seen Mr. Mac use ingredients that aren't fresh. We'll know if it's still alive after we try it," Abraham said with a smile. He reached out and broke off a pincer like how Amy ate it earlier. The surface of the crayfish shell was rather dry, and there were already cracks on the hard shell. He easily peeled off the shell without much effort, and revealed the meat that was filled with pincers. The toughness of the crayfish meat is not bad. It's not like those crayfish that were frozen in ice for a long time before being melted, Abraham said as he looked at the firm pincers before taking a bite of the meat. Abraham's eyes immediately lit up as he bit into the soft and plump prawn meat. A delicious flavor instantly blossomed, and the flavors of all types of spices had already seeped into the meat. The long period of cooking had absorbed all of the essence of the spices into the prawn meat. Compared to the dry prawn shell, the prawn meat was filled with juices and carried with it a hint of the wonderful aroma of wine. The slightly spicy texture didn't cover up the freshness of the crayfish meat at all. He could even feel the tender and chewy texture when he bit into the meat. It was a beautiful movement that made his scalp tingle. As someone who had gone to the Demon Islands as a representative of the Roth Empire, he had tasted the mantis prawns that were just caught from the sea and cooked immediately. The fresh taste and texture were unforgettable. However, compared to this crayfish, the king mantis prawn that Master Tony called the best prawn on the Demon Islands lost without a doubt. Whether it was the freshness of the crayfish meat, the chewy texture, or the scrumptiousness brought about by the amazing culinary skills, the braised crayfish made by Mr. Mac completely crushed that king mantis prawn. I can guarantee with my reputation that this is definitely cooked with fresh, live crayfish. Abraham swallowed the crayfish meat in his mouth, and seriously said, "Furthermore, this is the most delicious crayfish I've ever eaten. There's no other." Oh. Randy was a little surprised. After this period of interaction, he knew that Abraham's knowledge in food was not inferior to his. However, he still didn't believe that Meg could bring the crayfish back to Chaos City alive. He couldn't imagine the cost. He twisted the crayfish's head off, and looked at the crayfish roe. The fresh aroma wafted over. He scooped up a spoonful of crayfish roe. The crayfish roe was very plump, and there wasn't any fishy smell of seafood. This was indeed very different from the frozen crayfish he had eaten in Chaos City. Chapter 1393. Randy put a spoonful of crayfish butter into his mouth. Freshness and fragrance were the first reactions his taste buds got. He only took a light sip, and it melted in his mouth. It was indeed the freshness that belonged to the sea. He had also gone to the Demon Islands before, and stayed on that nameless island for a period of time. If it wasn't for the fact that his relationship with that demon lady was accidentally leaked, and her drunkard husband was looking for him everywhere with a knife, he might have stayed there for a period of time. However, the taste of the sea was unforgettable. The fish and prawns caught from the sea were the best gift from nature. They didn't even need any seasoning. They only needed to be boiled in water, and their freshness would blossom. And this crayfish had the wonderful freshness that belonged to the sea. It was just like the sweet smell that he smelled when he was playing in the sea with that madam. Abraham was right. This was the freshest live crayfish. Only a live crayfish could be so fresh and delicious. Only a live crayfish could blossom with its own freshness and bring back sweet memories. Although it's unbelievable, I have to admit that this is indeed a fresh crayfish from the sea. Randy nodded at Abraham, and couldn't help but praise, "I've never thought that I would be able to eat such fresh seafood in Chaos City. Just the fact that it's a live crayfish alone is worth more than 1,000 copper coins. Mr. Mac is indeed that kind of boss." Meg happened to hear Randy's exclamation, and lamented in his heart without blushing, "Yes. I also feel that I'm very kind. This crayfish is really delicious, and it's so big. I only need to peel the shell once, and I can eat until I'm full. This feeling is so blissful." While Randy and Abraham were still lamenting about the preciousness of this crayfish and the uniqueness of its cooking method, Vanessa had already peeled the shell, and was happily gnawing on the plump crayfish meat. The crayfish meat was already soaked in the spices, and the plump gravy brought about a very pleasant eating experience. It was fresh and spicy with a hint of sweetness. The feeling of gnawing on it was simply blissful. Although I've waited for 5 days, this crayfish dish of Mr. Mac's has completely exceeded my expectations. It's so worth it. Abraham took a sip of beer before heaving a long sigh of relief. He nodded and said, "It really is a perfect match with beer. If only it could be a little heavier. I think it would be even better to eat that way." Randy raised his glass and clinked it with Abraham's. He took a sip, and smilingly said, "Of course, this doesn't affect its position in my heart at all. It's the #1 seafood." Most of the customers who ordered the crayfish were full of praise for it. At the same time, they were more tolerant of Meg's behavior of standing them up for 5 days. The popularity of crayfish also increased the sales of beer. Eating crayfish while drinking a glass of cold beer was a pleasant and wonderful feeling that no man could resist. After the lunch service ended, Meg calculated that he had sold a total of 500 crayfish. It was incomparable to the thousands of crayfish he had easily sold on Carapace Island. However, due to the increase in the unit price, the revenue had increased quite a bit. So, what's the use of just selling quantity? A low-profit strategy won't last long. Meg murmured in his heart. The good reputation that the restaurant had accumulated in the early stages made the promotion of the new product easy. Of course, the taste was the most important productivity. Reina, I've already called for a carriage for you. The coachman will help to move your things. You can go back and move your mother and the things you need to the dormitory, Meg said to Reina, who had just finished tidying up the kitchen, as he came back very quickly. Thank you, boss. Reina looked at the big carriage that was waiting outside the door, and bowed to Meg before taking off her apron and walking out. You've provided a dormitory for Reina? Irina asked Meg as she rubbed Ugly Duckling's chubby face. Meg glanced at Ugly Duckling, whose face had been rubbed into a square shape. It didn't dare to get angry or speak. He nodded and said, yes. Reina is staying in the north of the city now, and it's too far from the restaurant. Firstly, it's inconvenient, and secondly, it's not safe for her to walk alone at night. Hence, I let her and her mother stay next to Mia and the rest. Irina responded. Reina's mother is sick, and it's quite serious. I would like you to take a look at her. Is that okay? Meg continued. Sure. I don't have anything to do in the afternoon anyway. Irina nodded. Also, I promised to treat Vanessa's teeth. I'm going to ask Cece to come over and take a look to see if there's a more natural way to fix them. Do you want to come and take a look? She's been eating too much candy. If she doesn't stop eating candy, it won't take long for her teeth to become like that again even if they're fixed. Irina looked as if she had seen through everything. Eating candy is indeed a problem. Meg agreed with Irina's judgment. He then said, however, apart from the candy, there might be something else that's affecting her teeth. You're talking about that black thing, right? I don't know what that is, either. Irina shook her head. Meg frowned slightly. He thought for a moment and said, Vanessa has been brushing her teeth every day and has effectively removed a lot of the black stuff. If it's effective, then this problem can be suppressed by brushing her teeth every day. It shouldn't be a big problem. Reina didn't spend too much time moving because they didn't have much to take with them. As for the shabby quilts, bowls, and other daily necessities, she had already abandoned them under Meg's repeated reminders. She spent the most time convincing her mother to agree to throw away those things. Then she got on the carriage and headed to the new dormitory that Mr. Meg had provided for them. Of course, they had to go to the restaurant first. Mother, this is the restaurant where I work, Reina said with a smile as she helped Karen's out of the carriage after the carriage stopped. What a beautiful restaurant. Karen's eyes lit up as she looked at the restaurant with large floor-to-ceiling windows and exclaimed. Let's go. Mr. Meg should be waiting for us. Reina said with a smile as she carefully helped Karen's to the restaurant. She gently knocked on the door before pushing it open and walking in. Reina, Mrs. Karen's, you're here. Meg greeted them with a smile. Mr. Meg, thank you very much for your kindness in letting us stay in the dormitory that you provided. I'm really sorry for making you bear so much burden for a useless old lady like me. Karen's looked at Meg and said gratefully. This is a benefit that Reina should enjoy as a restaurant employee. It's also my duty to make sure that my employees don't get tired of living. Meg said with a smile as he introduced her, this is Princess Irina. She happened to be free today and promised to check your body. This. Reina's eyes lit up. After working in the restaurant for a while, she naturally knew Irina's identity. She didn't expect that someone of noble status would be willing to treat her mother. She looked at Meg with a bit more gratitude. It must be the boss who asked Princess Irina for this. Karen's heard this and hurriedly bowed to Meg and Irina. She said gratefully, "Then, I'll thank you and your highness in advance." Chapter 1394. You're welcome. Irina reached out to help Karen's up. A green light flowed from her fingertips into Karen's wrist. Irina's fingertips tapped lightly, and the green light became brighter. The speed of the flow also increased. Karen's skin emitted a dense green light. She had already closed her eyes subconsciously. Her pale and tired face regained its color at a speed visible to the naked eye. Her short breaths also gradually calmed down. Reina stood at the side with a nervous expression. Her gaze gradually became joyful. This afternoon, she received very bad news from the doctor. Her mother's condition was very difficult to control. The doctor even asked her to give up treatment. But now, with Princess Irina's miraculous magic, her mother's condition seemed to be improving rapidly. About 3 minutes later, Irina withdrew her hand. "Mother," Reina stepped forward and grabbed Karen's hand. She was a little nervous, but also a little expectant. Karen's opened her eyes and touched her throat in disbelief. She then patted her chest and said in surprise, "My illness is cured." "That's great. That's great." Reina hugged Karen's happily. For the past 2 years, her mother had been bedridden. Her body was getting weaker and weaker. She didn't expect that she would be completely cured. Karen's also hugged Reina with a smile, but she quickly let go of her. She bowed deeply to Irina and said gratefully, "Your Highness, I don't know how to thank you for letting such a noble person treat my mother." "It's no problem. It's just a small matter," Irina said with a relaxed expression. "Your Highness, thank you for saving my mother." Reina also bowed deeply to Irina. Irina looked at Reina and said, "Your mother's body is still a little weak. Eat more nutritious food, such as bone broth, and she will soon recover to a normal person's body." "Yes, yes." Reina nodded quickly. "Reina, when you make soup in the future, pack a portion for Mrs. Karen so that you don't have to go home and make it again," Meg said with a smile. The bone broth from the restaurant was definitely more nutritious than the bone broth from outside. Reina was a little hesitant. 50 copper coins per bowl. It will be deducted from your meal allowance. Reina smiled again, and nodded vigorously. Reina left with her mother. They had just moved to a new house and needed some time to get used to it. Your life magic is getting stronger and stronger. Meg closed the door and looked at Irina, who was pinching a green wisteria leaf and watching it grow into a green wisteria on her fingertips. Irina put the devil's ivy back into the hydroponic vase and said calmly, "It's just a lack of vitality due to overwork. I helped her fill the gap. As long as she has enough nutrition, she'll recover very quickly." "That's good." Meg nodded. When Karen's came in just now, he had checked her health report. There were no major problems, but her body's indicators were on the low side. However, after Irina's life energy infusion, all her indicators had returned to normal. The problem of insufficient nutrition could be solved with a period of nourishment. "I went to the Grey Temple in the morning." Meg sat down opposite Irina. "That old man Roland found out that we did it." Irina raised her eyebrows. "I think they might have found out. At least, they have some suspicions." Meg nodded. "Then we can only silence them." Irina's face turned cold and murderous. Meg was taken aback. He hurriedly explained that, "Actually, we don't have to be so aggressive. I think they have good intentions towards us. They even took the initiative to help us create an alibi." Irina looked at Meg and suddenly laughed. As she laughed, she said, "You look so nervous." "It's so funny." Meg's expression froze. Looking at Irina, who was laughing like a child, he sighed silently in his heart. What could he do? This was his wife. How could he fight back when she was teasing him? "I heard that you're quite close to a girl who buys clothes. Do you often drink tea together?" Irina's smile suddenly disappeared. She looked at Meg with some scrutiny. Meg raised his eyebrows. Who leaked the news? Although he was suddenly nervous, Meg's expression was still calm. He pretended to be relaxed and said with a smile, "You're talking about Miss Gloria, right? She's the boss of Suede Clothing. I'm a fashion designer in their store, so we have some contact at work. When we talk about work, we will drink tea or something. You know how to design clothes?" Irina was surprised. "I'm not that talented. All the staff uniforms in the restaurant, as well as all the clothes that Amy wears, were designed by me. Also, all the clothes that Suede Clothing launched were all designed by me." Meg raised his chin 45 degrees. "It's not that you're not talented. You're shameless." The system's angry voice sounded. "Really? I heard that store is the most popular women's clothing store in Chaos City now. I was planning to go and take a look." Irina looked at Meg with surprise and admiration. Meg was very satisfied with Irina's gaze and the fact that he had successfully led the conversation astray. He nodded and said, "Sure. They're going to launch a new down jacket soon. You can go and take a look." "Down jacket? What kind of clothes are those? Are they made of feathers?" Irina asked curiously. A down jacket is a kind of garment made by stuffing white goose down into the interlayer of the garment. The down jacket made this way is light, but it is very warm, Mag explained. "I see." Irina pondered for a moment before her gaze landed on Ugly Duckling. "Is it like Ugly Ducklings?" "It's a little ugly." Meow. Ugly Duckling looked at Irina in confusion. Meg looked at Ugly Duckling's fluffy feathers and shook his head. "It's not this kind of fluffy feathers." "All right. I'll go and take a look when I have time." Irina retracted her gaze and looked at Meg again. She asked with a smile, "But, how did you become his designer?" "That's a long story," Meg replied. Of course, it would be best if he didn't tell her. "It's all right, I have all the time in the world." Irina sat calmly in the chair like a serious listener. Meg looked at Irina and said, "If we want to talk about this, we have to start with a bowl of tofu pudding." "This Miss Gloria, ding." The crisp sound of a bell interrupted Meg. Meg looked at the clock on the wall, and walked to the door as he said, "It's time to meet Vanessa." No pop-up window. Chapter 1395. "I'm here, Mr. Mac." Vanessa and Laura stood at the entrance of the restaurant and smiled at Meg. Meg had never seen Vanessa so cute. He nodded with a smile and said, "Come on in. I'll go get Cece." "Okay." Vanessa nodded and walked past Meg with Laura into the restaurant. Meg heard the greetings behind him. He closed the door and walked to the magic potion shop next door. There was nothing going on between him and Gloria, but when it came to women, no matter how they tried to explain, it would seem that there was something going on between them. Luckily, Irina wasn't an unreasonable woman. Their conversation was safe and didn't reach the level of questioning. However, this also sent a signal to him. As a married man, he should be more careful when drinking tea with Gloria in the future. He couldn't let anyone see him. Meg walked into the magic potion shop and smelled the faint smell of potions. Cece was standing in front of a pile of glassware with her back to the door. She was mixing magic potions carefully. Ever since Cece became a professional potion maker in the magic potion shop, the business of the magic potion shop had skyrocketed. The customer flow brought by Mamie's also increased the business of the magic potion shop. Their main product, recovery potions, were twice as effective as other magic potions of the same price. They were in short supply every day. Julian had successfully become a hands-off boss. Of course, the turnover didn't matter to him. Meg stood aside and waited quietly for a while. Cece put the blue-green liquid in the glassware into small bottles and closed the lids one by one. She was about to put the potions on the shelves when she noticed Meg standing in the shop. "Mr. Mac, when did you get here?" Cece was surprised. She looked up at the clock on the wall. It was already 2:05. She said apologetically, "I'm sorry. It's easy to lose track of time when I'm busy mixing potions. I forgot the time we agreed on." "It's okay. I just got here too." Mixing magic potions requires full concentration. "Are you done now?" Meg said with a smile. "Yes, I'm done. Let's go." "I'm so sorry to be late." Cece put the magic potions on the shelf and followed Meg to the restaurant. Meg took Cece back to the restaurant. Vanessa and Irina were chatting happily. Cece greeted Irina with a smile. Then, Meg introduced her to Vanessa. "Since everyone is here, let's start the consultation on Miss Windsor's dental problem." Meg sat down next to Irina. Vanessa sat opposite the three of them and showed her teeth. Meg pointed at Vanessa's teeth with a pair of chopsticks and said, "First, let me introduce the condition of Miss Windsor's teeth. Half a month ago, her teeth were basically covered by this black substance, and it was accompanied by serious gum problems. After using Yunnan Baiyao toothpaste to brush her teeth scientifically, the gum problems have been effectively controlled, and the black substance has decreased significantly. Obviously, brushing scientifically can remove and suppress this substance. The main problem now is how to clean up the black stains inside the holes caused by the moths and fill them up so that the teeth can return to normal. Then, she can continue to brush her teeth every day as a long-term solution so that she can have a healthy set of teeth. Life magic and light magic won't be able to purify the substance, but I can soften the ivory and fill it up. It's how elves fill their teeth," Irina said. "That's not a bad idea, but if the substance isn't cleaned up, the remaining teeth will be corroded from the inside." Meg looked at Cece. "I can try." Cece nodded and took the chopsticks from Meg's hand. A light green light surrounded the chopsticks, and the color of the chopsticks quickly turned green. Branches grew out from the edges, and green bamboo leaves grew out. "That's impressive." Vanessa and Laura both looked at the chopsticks in astonishment. The bamboo chopsticks transformed into slender green bamboo poles, and the speed at which she was able to use them was much faster than when she had first used them in front of Mag. Clearly, Cece's world tree had recovered significantly after receiving Irina's help. "Miss Vanessa, please show me your teeth." Cece stood up and walked up to Vanessa. Vanessa opened her mouth as she was told. If her teeth could be cured, she would be able to eat all the delicious food she wanted to eat in the future. Almost every tooth was filled with holes of different sizes. Some of them had even penetrated through the entire tooth. The pain was unimaginable. The black substance in the holes was not beautiful at all. Cece put the thin bamboo stick in her hand on Vanessa's teeth like a toothbrush. The thin bamboo stick started to break down like snow melting. Tiny green light spots scattered on Vanessa's teeth. The black substance in the holes and on the surface of Vanessa's teeth melted away instantly when it came into contact with the green light spots, just like oil in contact with a powerful detergent. "It seems to be effective." Cece smiled. She continued to control the thin bamboo stick to slide over Vanessa's teeth, breaking down the substance in an efficient way. Is it really effective? Vanessa's eyes lit up, and she asked in a muffled voice. She only felt that the spot where her teeth had been touched was cold and refreshing. If not for the bamboo in her mouth, she would have wanted to see how her teeth had changed. It's very effective. A smile also appeared on Mag's face. As expected, calling Cece along was the right decision. Normal magic was completely ineffective against this black stain, but Cece was most likely the last druid in this world who was capable of nature magic. Nature magic was simply too effective against this black stain. Yeah, Princess, the substance is really gone, Laura also said excitedly. She didn't even notice what she had just said. About 3 minutes later, the thin bamboo stick in Cece's hand had completely melted. Vanessa's teeth were as white as new. There were no longer any black substance on them. Take a look at the effect. Meg handed a mirror to Vanessa. Vanessa held the mirror with both hands and stared blankly at her snow-white teeth for a full minute. She finally put down the mirror and jumped up from the chair. She hugged Cece and said with tears of gratitude, "Thank you, Sister Cece, thank you so much, don't worry about it, it's nothing." Cece patted Vanessa's back with a smile. She could imagine how painful it must have been for a beautiful girl to be troubled by her teeth. Now that the substance is gone, let's start filling your teeth. Irina took out a pure white elephant tusk and a small knife. She then looked at Vanessa and said, "Do you want to fill in your teeth, or do you want a full set of elephant tusks?" Chapter 1396. Can you make a full set of ivory? Vanessa looked at the ivory tusks in Irina's hand with a hint of surprise on her face. Of course you can. Otherwise, how do you think the elves who are over 700 years old get their mouths full of teeth? Their teeth start to fall off when they're over 600 years old, and all of them have a full set of ivory by the time they're over 700 years old. Irina nodded with a confident smile as she said, "Also, with this set of ivory, you'll be a level higher than a dog." What does this have to do with dogs? Vanessa asked with a perplexed look on her face. Nothing good ever comes out of a dog's mouth, but you'll be able to do it in the future. Irina smiled. Vanessa faltered upon hearing this, but Meg and the others couldn't help but burst into laughter. It sounds very impressive, but I still want to keep my teeth. Big sister Irina, please use your ivory to help me fill in my teeth, please. Vanessa looked at Irina with a sincere expression. The problem with her teeth had been plaguing her for many years. She would always tell herself that it didn't matter if she didn't have any friends and that she couldn't appear in public. However, who didn't want to wear a beautiful evening gown and appear at the most lavish banquet in the world? She didn't want to be that ugly freak who didn't dare to show her face in public. She didn't want to hide in a palace in the outskirts of Rodu. Of course, the most important thing was that she really wanted to try spicy grilled fish and spicy hot pot. Open your mouth. Irina lifted Vanessa's chin before slicing off a small piece of ivory with a small knife. She curled her finger, and the rice-sized pieces of ivory floated into the air before being quickly softened and transformed by golden light before being injected into the cavity. The speed at which the ivory was softened and filled in was extremely fast. Around 2 to 3 minutes later, Irina withdrew her finger, and Vanessa's mouth had been completely repaired. Moreover, the color of the ivory was exactly the same as the original color of the teeth. There were no traces of filling, and even the curvature of the surface of the teeth did not feel out of place. That's great, miss. Miss, your teeth have really recovered. They're neat and white now. Laura said in surprise, tears of excitement welling up in her eyes. Vanessa held up the mirror and looked at her neat, white teeth. She was stunned for a while before tears streamed down her face. Are you not satisfied? Irina came over to take a look and asked. No, look, she's such a beautiful girl. How could she be buried by a mouthful of teeth? Vanessa shook her head with a sorrowful expression. Irina nodded and said seriously, yes, if I had fixed my teeth earlier, I might have been betrothed to some demon prince, the kind with eyeballs all over his body. Vanessa was stunned, and even her tears stopped. She looked at Irina in horror. I lied to you. Irina stroked Vanessa's hair with a smile. Without waiting for her expression to calm down, she continued, the Roth Empire is not on good terms with the fear demons. They might also find you a forest troll prince with geckos all over his body. Wah! Vanessa burst into tears immediately. She covered her mouth with a pitiful expression and said, I'm most afraid of geckos. I don't want any demon prince or forest troll prince. I don't want to marry a prince. Vanessa's gaze scanned the restaurant and landed on Meg. She looked at Meg pleadingly and said, Mr. Mac, please marry me. Ha! Meg, who was just watching the show, was stunned. Why did she suddenly ask him to marry Vanessa? Does he dare? Irina looked at Meg with a smile. I really don't dare. I'm still worried that Duke Abraham will tear my hand off. Meg quickly waved his hand. What a joke. If he dared to nod, Irina would tear his hand off. However, after her rotten teeth were fixed, Vanessa could indeed be called a beautiful young lady. She had perfectly inherited the royal bloodline and looks. Meg had seen the queen at the palace banquet before. Vanessa had inherited her beauty and elegance. She had a tall figure and a slender neck, just like a white swan. Ding! Congratulations, host, for completing Vanessa's tooth repair mission. Reward, a durian pizza recipe. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. Meg didn't have any objections. It was a difficult and lengthy mission, but thankfully, he had completed it with the help of Cece and Irina. The threat of tooth decay had been completely eliminated. Vanessa was a little disappointed to be rejected by Meg. Even though her teeth had been fixed, was Mr. Mac still not interested in her? Vanessa, now that your teeth have been fixed, you can eat whatever you want. As long as you keep the habit of brushing your teeth every day, you won't have to worry about tooth decay in the future, Meg said with a smile. That's right. Vanessa's eyes lit up, and a smile reappeared on her face. She looked at Meg and said, then can I try the insanely spicy grilled fish and spicy hot pot tonight? If you want to try, I won't stop you. Meg nodded. That's great. Vanessa's smile became even brighter. She thought for a moment and hurriedly asked Laura to open her bag. She took out a bag full of money and handed it to Meg. She said, Mr. Mac, this is a little reward for helping me heal my tooth. Thank you very much. You're welcome. Meg took the heavy bag and accepted it without hesitation. It was a good deal to treat it as a business deal. After all, they weren't close yet, and he was enemies with her father and 2 brothers. He had already done his best. Vanessa took off a white jade pendant from her body, and solemnly handed it to Cece. She said gratefully, Sister Cece, this is my favorite jade pendant. Thank you for helping me heal my tooth. Thank you. Cece looked at the jade pendant. It was smooth and warm to the touch, and there were beautiful patterns on the surface. She thought for a moment, and accepted the jade pendant. Vanessa looked at Irina and thought for a moment. She was a little distressed. It's okay. With our friendship, you can just give me 1 or 200 million. Irina smiled. I see. Then I'll have to go back and ask my father for it. Vanessa was a little distressed. Then you can owe him for now. Ask him to send the money. After all, you're in my hands now. Irina said with a relaxed expression. That's right. Then I'll write him a letter tonight. Vanessa nodded. Meg looked at Irina, who looked like she was cheating a child out of her pocket money. He could only pretend that he didn't know anything. Of course, he didn't dare to ask anything. Vanessa left happily. Cece also left. Only Meg and Irina were left in the restaurant. Meg looked at Irina, who was staring at him. He shook the bag of money in his hand, and then poured it on the table. A bag of dragon coins fell out. He said with a smile, "That's a good deal. Are restaurant owners nowadays so concerned about their customers' dental health? I saw that some of the old men's teeth weren't very good today." Irina said with a smile. Chapter 1397. We watched Vanessa grow up. We couldn't bear to see her so sad because of her teeth, so we decided to help her, Meg said honestly. It's pretty good. I wanted to help her get rid of it before, but I couldn't get rid of that black substance. Look at how she smiles. She looks exactly the same as when she was young. Irina nodded with a smile on her face. Meg closed the door, and sat down opposite Irina. He asked, "Are you used to the elves we brought back 2 days ago?" Those who joined the night elves have similar experiences. It's pretty good that they're together to keep each other warm. Irina nodded, but her expression was still a little gloomy. I got the latest news about the various races from the Grey Temple this morning, including the Wind Forest. Do you want to take a look? I haven't had the time to take a look yet, Meg said to her as he stood up. All right. Irina stood up, and followed Meg upstairs to the study. Meg took out the box from the secret compartment, unlocked it, and opened it. There were 8 craft paper bags inside, which represented the 8 races. There was also a slightly smaller wooden box under the paper bags. It should contain the information that Roland didn't disclose to him previously. Information about the Wind Forest. Meg took out a craft paper bag, and passed it to Irina. It should contain the information about the Wind Forest during this period of time. Irina took the craft paper bag, and sat down in front of the study table. She began to browse through it seriously. Her information channels were cut off after she came to Chaos City, so first-hand information like this was very precious. On the night before the Wind Forest Allied forces launched their attack, most of the Night Elves left the underground cavern through the tunnel, and returned to the Wind Forest to spread the Night Elves' mission. She was most concerned about their situation now. Meg pulled out the paper bag on the Demon Islands and sat down on another chair. He began to carefully read through the information. He was also quite curious as to how their trip to the Demon Islands had affected the demon tribe. 2 hours passed quickly, and Meg was still looking at the strength comparison between the Fear Demons and the Shirelles. Irina put down all the information in her hands and looked at Meg. I'm going to the Wind Forest. Meg raised his head and looked at Irina in surprise. Did something happen? In 3 days, Helena will officially make Sally the princess of the elven race, and burn all the traitors they've caught, Irina said in a cold voice. Dark elves. Meg heard from Irina that the batch of night elves who had followed her for the longest time had already returned to the Wind Forest, and were preparing to instigate more elves to join the night elves. Irina nodded. Yes. The night elves have been promoting freedom, and more elves have been inspired by freedom. They joined the organization and kept expanding the scale of the night elves. This phenomenon has already appeared everywhere in the Wind Forest. It's like a spark that's brewing a prairie fire. Helena and those ruling elves have already sensed the threat, so they've captured a batch of night elves and labeled them as traitors. They're preparing to kill them to intimidate the other elves. You intend to save them. Meg was also a little surprised by the speed of the night elf spread and development. Those night elves who were like sparks could ignite the fire so quickly. It was evident that the internal situation of the elves was indeed very bad. "I have to go," Irina said with certainty. "Okay, then I'll go with you," Meg said. After breaking through to the 9th tier, he had the ability to protect himself in front of a 10th tier being with Oz. Even if he couldn't provide too much help to Irina, he could at least intimidate the other elves. "Okay." Irina looked at Meg with a slight smile. She didn't know when it started, but she was already used to him saying that he would accompany her. Their purpose this time, other than killing the chicken to warn the monkey, may also be a trap for you. "Before we go, we need to make some preparations," Meg said with a slight frown. "In the wind forest, I'm stronger than they think. The tree of life will stand on my side." Irina's expression was rather relaxed. "That's good." Meg didn't doubt Irina's judgment. The tree of life was the holy tree of the elves, and had existed for thousands of years. With it on Irina's side, their chances of winning would indeed be higher. Of course, he still had to make some preparations. He had to ensure Irina's safety. After looking at the time, Meg went downstairs to prepare for the evening business. The restaurant's business hours were the longest at night, and it was also the busiest time. Where's the crayfish restaurant? How could such a big crayfish restaurant disappear? Tony stood in front of the ruins, and yelled with a look of despair. "This." Steve was also dumbfounded. How could the crayfish restaurant disappear overnight? The fisherman who came to sell crayfish with a bucket was already there for the 3rd time. He was also dumbfounded when he saw the crayfish restaurant suddenly turned into ruins. He originally wanted to make a fortune by catching crayfish, but he didn't expect that the restaurant would disappear when he caught crayfish to sell. Only a pile of ruins was left behind. Tony panicked a little, and grabbed Steve as he said, "It's over, it's over. The manuscript that was sent out has already been finalized and printed. It's probably on the way to distribute the goods now. If the article goes viral, and the crayfish restaurant disappears, do you think the readers will tear me apart?" Steve glanced at the ruins, and then nodded at Tony. "I suggest you go out and lie low for the time being." He could even imagine how those readers who came over excitedly would go berserk after seeing the ruins. With Tony's influence, there would definitely be many demons who would come to Carapace Island for a taste. Boss Hades has misled me. He didn't even tell me in advance that he was going to leave. Isn't he pushing me into the fire pit? Tony pulled a long face, and felt that his future was bleak. "I'm such a pitiful man. Why don't you go to Chaos City to lie low for a while? I'll write you a letter to ask you to come back after this storm blows over," Steve suggested. "It seems like that's the only way now." Tony nodded because he already saw those customers who couldn't eat the crayfish starting to vent their anger by bombarding the ruins. If his readers came here, they would probably vent their anger on him in the same way. "It's best that I don't meet that boss Hades again. Otherwise, I'll definitely press him to the ground and give him a good beating. Then, I'll make him give me an explanation." Tony clenched his teeth, and turned to leave resentfully. He had to pack his things and leave. Chapter 1398. Uncle Abraham, my teeth are fixed. Vanessa couldn't help but exclaim happily as soon as she walked into the courtyard. "Princess, you have to pay attention to your manners," Laura reminded her softly with an equally excited smile on her face. Tooth fixed. Abraham ran out of the house next door with a whoosh. He only had one shoe on his feet, and stared at Vanessa with wide eyes. "Princess, your teeth are really fixed. Here, look." Vanessa opened her mouth, and showed Abraham her teeth, which had become white and neat. "It's true. They're neat and white." Abraham's eyes lit up, and he clapped his hands excitedly. "That's great. Our little princess has become a beautiful girl again." His Majesty and the Queen will be very happy if they know about this. He had watched Vanessa grow up, and he knew how much she had suffered because of her teeth. I'm a beautiful girl, all right. Vanessa said with a smile. Did Mr. Mac heal you? Abraham asked. No, Mr. Mac, Big Sister Cece, and Big Sister Irina helped me. Vanessa shook her head. So it was Princess Irina who did it. Abraham was enlightened, but he wasn't too surprised. He also knew that Vanessa and Irina had a good relationship. Yes, I've already paid Mr. Mac and Big Sister Cece, but I haven't paid Big Sister Vanessa yet. Do you have 100 million copper coins with you? 100 million. Abraham's eyelids twitched. Although it wasn't a big sum to him, 100 million copper coins for a tooth repair seemed a little extortionate. He had heard about Irina establishing the Night Elves and rebelling against the Wind Forest. It was understandable that she was tight on money now that she had so many mouths to feed. If you don't have it, then I'll write a letter to Father to ask for it. He should have it, Vanessa said. You don't have to look for Her Majesty. It's only 100 million. Just take it as Uncle paying for your tooth. Abraham said with a smile. He took out a leather wallet from his pocket and pulled out a 100 million copper coin deposit receipt from Buffett Banks, handing it to Vanessa. Thank you, Uncle Abraham. Vanessa took the deposit slip and said with a smile, then let's go try the insanely spicy hot pot tonight. Insanely spicy. Mr. Mac, in the future, if you take little Amy out for more than 3 days, please let me know in advance. My body is quite strong, so it's not a problem for me to follow you around. I can even be little Amy's bodyguard. If you encounter any trouble or encounter any difficult ingredients, I can help you solve it. Crassus walked to the entrance of the restaurant, and looked at Meg with a smile. He looked quite friendly, but there was a hint of disdain in his smile. Well. Meg raised an eyebrow. Although bringing Crassus with him meant that he had a super bodyguard, it was not convenient at all. Their family time together was very precious. Julian walked up to him, and said in a cold voice, If I'm here, I'll freeze any magic beasts or people with evil intentions that dare to come within 100 meters of Amy. If there's a chance next time, I'll definitely ask the 2 of you to come along. Meg smiled, feeling a little guilty. After all, he had just skipped 5 days of classes with Amy. Crassus and Julian were probably going to skin him alive. What a pair of clingy masters. Amy hugged the ugly duckling and heaved a resigned sigh. Crassus and Julian blushed. They didn't expect to be criticized like that by their precious disciple one day. The braised crayfish successfully gained a good reputation among the customers. This new dish brought a huge surprise to the customers, and allowed the residents of Chaos City who lived inland to enjoy the scrumptious crayfish that was full of seafood flavor. The combination of braised crayfish and beer also spread like wildfire, and almost became a standard dish. A mouthful of crayfish skulls full of crayfish roe, and a refreshing cold beer. All the flavors of the world were in it. Since Reina could already make all kinds of hot pot bases easily, Meg gave her full authority over the designated hot pot area, and he was responsible for cooking the other dishes. This greatly reduced his workload, and at the same time, generated more revenue for the restaurant. After the dinner service ended, Mia and the rest helped to clean up the restaurant, and then left. Meg walked to the door. Just as he was about to close and lock the door, a hand pressed on it. Camilla, you haven't gone back yet. Meg opened the door, and was a little surprised to see Camilla standing at the door. She was in charge of preparing the ingredients, and had left before the restaurant opened for business. Camilla leaned against the door frame, and looked up at Meg. Her voice was firm, and she said, I can't sleep, and I want a drink. The kind that won't stop until I'm drunk. Will you accompany me? Meg raised his eyebrows as he looked at Camilla, who was wearing a high-slit black dress that revealed her long and slender legs. She was exuding an aura of a big sister. A beauty invited him to drink with her in the middle of the night, and the kind that won't stop until he's drunk. What should he do? This scene didn't seem to be very harmonious, did it? Won't stop until he's drunk. An oppressive voice sounded from behind Meg. The half-open door was pulled open, and Irina stood beside Meg with a half-smile. She looked at Camilla and said, "I'll accompany you." "You? Why are you here?" Camilla looked at Irina, who was standing beside Meg, and was instantly shocked. Her domineering aura was completely lost, and she was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on by a mouse. She subconsciously jumped back and looked at Irina in surprise, and then at Meg. "What's your relationship? What a coincidence." "I can't sleep either, and I just happened to want to find someone to drink until he's drunk." "Looks like we found the same person," Irina said with a smile, and put her right hand on Meg's shoulder. Her domineering aura was fully unleashed, and she had a victorious smile on her face. Then you guys drink first." Camilla looked at Meg with a complicated gaze, and turned to leave. "Why, are you scared?" Irina said with a chuckle. Camilla stopped in her tracks and gritted her teeth. "This is too much." She adjusted her expression, and turned back to look at Irina. She said in a relaxed tone, "What's there to be scared of?" "Scared that you'll eat me?" "That's hard to say." "Come in." Irina smiled meaningfully. When she turned around, she glanced at Meg, and casually found a chair to sit down. Camilla also glanced at Meg, and when she walked past him, she snorted with a nasal sound, and sat down directly opposite Irina. "Mag? What did I do?" "I clearly didn't do anything, okay? 2 glasses of beer, and any barbecue." Irina raised her hand, and then looked at Camilla. "What do you want?" "Me? As long as there's enough beer," Camilla said indifferently. Chapter 1399. Meg did not know why he had to continue being the chef after the opening hours to roast beef kebabs, grilled fish, and grilled prawns for the 2 women who were drinking, although the combination of barbecue and beer was really cool. But as a persecuted person, he was also very confused now. Standing beside the barbecue grill, Meg took a bite of the grilled beef and chewed it, letting the hot taste bloom in his mouth. Then, he took a sip of beer, experiencing the wonderful enjoyment of the ice and fire while observing the 2 women who were gradually getting better after drinking a few glasses of beer. Alcohol boosts courage. After a few glasses of beer, Camilla's aura gradually returned to her. She looked at Irina and said, You say, why do they all want to use me? Am I just something that can be used in exchange for benefits in their eyes? Even my father can betray me time and time again. Am I too ridiculous?" Irina also began to get a little drunk. She supported herself with one hand on the table and nodded seriously at Camilla. "It's not just ridiculous, it's simply pitiful." Camilla was stunned, and then began to wipe her tears. "You say, why am I so pitiful?" Listening to Camilla's description, Meg roughly understood why she wanted to get drunk tonight. It seemed that returning to the Demon Islands this time had a big impact on her, and she had no one to talk to, so she came to drink in the middle of the night. "It's okay. For you vampires, these difficulties and setbacks are nothing. At least you haven't experienced being watched eating grass." Irina comforted, "Why don't you try eating grass too? Maybe you can become the ancestor of vampires." "You mean, Uncle Dracula became the ancestor of vampires because he ate grass?" Camilla was a little doubtful. "If you don't try, how do you know it won't work?" Irina smiled. Camilla thought for a while and nodded. Then, she turned her head and shouted at Meg in the kitchen, "Boss, give me a plate of grass." When dealing with drunk women, he had to try his best to satisfy all their unreasonable requests. This was the experience that Meg had accumulated over the years. Therefore, he directly placed a plate of lettuce in front of Camilla, and then returned to the kitchen to continue watching the drinking game between the women. Camilla looked at the fresh green lettuce in front of her and narrowed her eyes. As a noble vampire, being a vegetarian was a shameful thing for vampires. Naturally, she had never done it before. "Eat it. If you eat it, you might become the next ancestor of vampires," Irina said, trying to tempt him. Camilla's throat moved. If she became the ancestor of vampires, no one would be able to force her to do anything. With her powerful strength and high status in the clan, even her father would have to bow respectfully when he saw her. What a tempting vision. Camilla grabbed a piece of lettuce and slowly brought it to her mouth. Meg silently took out the photo stone. This was the second vampire to actively eat grass, and it might even be the ancestor of the vampires in the future. What a memorable scene. Crunch. The tender lettuce made a crisp sound when she bit into it. The strange texture made Camilla slightly uncomfortable, but it was not as disgusting as she had expected. Instead, the texture was quite refreshing. After confirming that she could accept the taste, Camilla began to chew. Although the texture was a little strange, the taste of the leaf was quite refreshing and sweet. Surprisingly, it was not bad. Instead, it was very greasy, and it refreshed her mouth after eating roast beef. "How is it?" Irina asked. "I didn't expect it to be quite delicious." Camilla nodded and threw the remaining half of the leaf into her mouth to chew. When Dracula ate grass for the first time, he said the same thing, Irina said with a smile. Meg's expression was a little strange. He could imagine that Dracula was half tricked and half coaxed to eat his first grass. Then, he embarked on the path of no return of eating grass. Then, after N years, Camilla walked on this path again. "Is that so? Uncle Dracula's taste is indeed quite similar to mine." Camilla nodded, and then her gaze fell on the roast beef kebab in front of her. She used her chopsticks to take a piece of beef from the bamboo skewer, wrapped it in the lettuce leaf, and put it into her mouth. After chewing, her eyes lit up. The oil of the roast beef was absorbed by the lettuce leaf, and the taste of the meat itself was not affected. It was exceptionally refreshing and delicious. "I didn't expect grass to be so delicious." "It's even more delicious when wrapped in meat," Camilla said with some surprise. "Really?" Camilla handed a piece of lettuce leaf to Irina. "Try it too." Irina wrapped a piece of beef and put it into her mouth. The combination of meat and vegetables did make the roast beef much more refreshing. After eating a lot of roast beef kebabs, changing to such a refreshing taste was a very good way to eat. She nodded and admitted, "It is indeed a very good way to eat. You are really talented at eating grass. Your future is promising. Isn't it just a piece of lettuce leaf? Don't make a fuss." Meg glanced at the leftover lettuce leaf at the side, and also picked up a piece of lettuce to wrap 2 pieces of roast beef. He put it into his mouth together, and it tasted like Korean roast meat. After finishing the entire plate of grass and 2 glasses of beer, the two of them both passed out on the table drunk. Although they were already drunk, they still carried on a conversation. With such a low alcohol tolerance, don't say anything about not resting until you're drunk. Aren't you sending yourself to another bed? Meg put down the glass and walked out of the kitchen. He looked at the 2 drunk women, and said to himself helplessly. After carrying Irina back to the room and putting her on the bed, Meg went downstairs and looked at Camilla, who was still lying on the table. It was too late to throw her out. He didn't know what would happen if she was picked up by someone, but if she stayed, Meg carried her upstairs, made a mattress on the floor of the master bedroom, and put her directly on the floor. The survival logic was simple. No matter which room he put Camilla in, he could do something inappropriate to her while she was drunk. But if he put her in Irina's room, then there wouldn't be a problem. He believed that Irina wouldn't believe that he had the guts to do anything under her nose. Meg had just put Camilla down and was about to go downstairs to tidy up when his arm was suddenly grabbed. At the same time, Camilla mumbled, "I don't want to marry that trash Knox. I'd rather marry that wretched boss than marry him. Even if he can't do it, at least the dishes he cooks are delicious." Meg? Why can't he do it? Meg retracted his hand as he looked at Camilla, who was sleeping soundly, and went downstairs, feeling a little baffled. This was a great humiliation to him. If he wasn't being watched by the heavenly axiom, he would have proven whether he could do it or not. Hee, you don't have the guts. The system mocked online. Chapter 1400. Hee, you don't have a dick. Meg replied with a sneer. As a system, I don't need such a thing. Hee, even eunuchs would comfort themselves like this. Host, please respect the system. The system said sternly. You don't have one, but I do. So, this is the best evidence that I'm your father. Meg smiled. Meg went downstairs and cleaned up the mess left by the two drunk women. Then, he went upstairs to wash up and lay on the bed. Lying on the bed, Meg took out the photo stone and looked at it. Little dark room, whip, candle, Meg only realized that he had taken out the wrong photo stone after watching half of it. He kept this evil photo stone, and took out another one. He nodded with satisfaction as he watched Camilla eating a piece of lettuce happily. The image was very clear, and her expression was on point. It was worth keeping as a memento. If Camilla really became the ancestor of vampires in the future, Meg could give this photo stone to her as a congratulatory gift. The first experience of eating grass. After putting away the photo stone, Meg closed his eyes and calmed down for a while. Then, he opened the durian pizza experience bag in his mind. Meg's attitude towards durian was that he could accept it, but he didn't like it very much. Durian had a special fragrance. For many people, this smell was extremely smelly and hard to accept. But once they accepted this fragrance and tasted the durian themselves, most people would be mesmerized by the amazing taste and taste. This was similar to the treatment of stinky tofu. The combination of durian and pizza should be a relatively new combination. He didn't remember commenting on durian pizza before. Why would the system give this recipe to him as a reward? A lot of information entered his mind. In a short period of time, he had already mastered the skills of a top pizza chef. I wonder if Amy will like it. Meg muttered. It wasn't easy to obtain this menu. Of course, there was no reason for him to not learn it. It looked quite simple, and it wasn't a bad idea to use the remaining time to consolidate his strength. Concentrating, he pushed open the test field for the god of cookery. Meg's feet were empty, and he fell into the pile of durian. Spike stood upright, and Meg jumped up on the spot. His bare feet stepped on the spikes, and he directly waltzed on the pile of durian. Fuck. Meg couldn't help but swear. He tried to find some space at the edge and stood on one leg. The most important step in making durian pizza is to choose a high-quality durian. The quality of the durian directly determines the quality of the durian pizza. Therefore, in order for the host to have a better understanding of how to choose durians, the system has prepared 10,000 durians of different qualities for the host. Among them, there are 50 that can meet the standard. Please choose at least 10 high-quality durians. The system's voice sounded. 50 correct answers. Meg looked at the ground full of durians, and 10,000 alpacas ran through his heart. He could conclude that the system was using its power to avenge private grudges. However, after the system finished speaking, it went completely silent. The method to choose durian was indeed in the information that Meg had received before, and it didn't seem difficult. To choose durian, simply put, it was to look, smell, and pinch. Look, it was to see if the durian's shape was round and full, and if the color was yellow and transparent. Generally, the size couldn't be too small. Smell, it was to smell the smell of the durian that opened naturally. Generally, the smell of a mature durian was rich and fragrant, making one drool. Pinch, it was to pinch two adjacent spikes on the surface of the durian to see if it could be easily pulled together. The shell of a mature durian would also become soft. Was it simple? It did seem very simple. However, when you were faced with 10,000 durians, you wouldn't think that way. Meg looked around. This was a sealed space. Just like before, if he didn't complete the mission, he probably wouldn't be able to get out. Alright, it's just 10 durians. What's the big deal? Meg moved the durian by his feet forward, and he directly threw the half-collapsed and crooked durian into the corner. Choosing durians was a tough job, and one had to suffer from the scourge of spikes. Moreover, being trapped in such a completely sealed space, the rich smell of 10,000 durians was almost suffocating. If it was a durian enthusiast here, he would probably faint from happiness. Meg first used the observation method to eliminate most of the durians, then he began to pinch the spikes with his hands, eliminating all the durians that were too soft and too hard. Meg didn't know how much time had passed, but finally, there were only about 500 durians left in front of him. They were all big and full. In the corner behind him, the durians had already piled up into a mountain, and many of them were directly stuck to the wall. Alright, now let me smell you little fairies and see which of you are qualified. Meg picked up a durian casually, put it in front of his nose, and sniffed it. The fragrance was very strong, and it was the smell of a ripe durian. Qualified? Meg frowned. He felt that it was a little too casual to pick up a random one and say that it was qualified. After hesitating for a while, Meg put the durian in his hand in the pending area. Then he picked up the second durian. The fragrance of this one was a little more fragrant than the previous one. It was sweet, but the difference wasn't so obvious. After peeling it, he still didn't know which one would taste better. Pending. Meg also put the durian in his hand in the pending area, then picked up the third durian. Pending. Pending, Meg walked around and put 499 durians in the pending area, eliminating one durian. Hee hee. Meg looked at the durians in the pending area and sneered. There was no fucking difference at all. What smell was a little stronger, a little lighter, a little grassy? In such a completely enclosed space, facing the impact of the smell of 10,000 durians, how could he smell the slight difference? He wasn't Connie. Sitting beside the pile of durians and thinking about life for a while, Meg suddenly realized something. He raised his head and asked, "System, when the time comes, you will provide me with the best durians, right?" Of course. The durians provided by the system are planted in the durian islands in the boundless sea. The sun is abundant, the soil is fertile, and the durians that grow there are completely superior to the king of the Cat Mountain. Strictly following the principle of ripe melons will fall, every single durian is naturally ripe. And every single durian has gone through several procedures to select the best quality durian and send it to the host. The system said confidently. Then why do you ask me to choose a hammer here? Meg rolled his eyes and wanted to tear the system apart. Book Guesthouse Reading Website. Chapter 1401. After getting the confirmation from the system, Meg lay down on the ground. No matter how much the system talked, he was too lazy to look at the pile of durians next to him. Anyway, it was useless to learn this skill, so he could do whatever he wanted. After a while, the durian space disappeared, and Meg appeared in the kitchen. You're still too inexperienced to fight with Dad. Meg smirked and walked to the kneading table. All the ingredients were ready, and there was a big golden durian at the side. As soon as he got close, he could smell the strong durian fragrance. Although Meg had just come out of the durian space, he was still amazed by the fragrance. Meg had eaten the Bobcat King durian before. It was indeed better than the ordinary golden pillow durian in terms of texture and taste, but the fragrance was still a lot worse than this durian. After washing his hands and changing into his chef's uniform, Meg moved his fingers and grabbed the durian. With a little force, the durian with a small crack was opened by him. The strong durian fragrance suddenly hit his face. The ginger durian meat was very plump and ripe just right, making people want to take a bite. It's really perfect. Meg nodded and resisted the urge to eat the ingredients. Of course, such an unprofessional behavior would not appear on an excellent chef like him. He took out the durian meat and slid the knife through the durian meat to take out the silver coin-sized core. The pulp took up almost all of it. The most complicated part of making pizza was kneading the dough. How to make the dough meet the requirements was a test of the chef's technique and skills. Therefore, Meg chose the kneading machine. Pour in the flour, water, and dry yeast according to the ratio, and then press the button to start. As for the system's instructions to knead with his hands, Meg turned a deaf ear to it. Times were advancing. As a good helper for humans, machines had the advantage of high efficiency and stability. Although this was a backup plan, it was obviously more to Meg's liking. Meg had tested it before. Using the kneading machine produced by the system to knead dough, the effect was 99% similar to that of a high-level kneading machine. Although he still insisted on kneading the youtiao with his hands, he decided to use a machine to knead the dough for the pizza. He wanted to treat this Western dessert in a more Western way. To bake a delicious durian pizza, the control of the fire was also quite particular. However, the oven was used, so as long as the time and temperature were adjusted, a qualified pizza could be accurately made. Meg began to practice making pizza according to the steps in his mind. He had a premonition that this would be a sleepless night with durians. Rodu, the palace. On top of the tower, André, who was dressed in luxurious clothes, looked toward the southwest with a slight frown. Your Majesty, the Demon Islands are in a mess, and there are internal conflicts everywhere. I'm afraid that they can no longer unite against the outside world, and their alliance with us will probably be difficult to continue. The wind forest had revolted everywhere. Just dealing with the internal chaos was enough to make them badly battered. Do we need to find another reliable ally? An old official stood behind him and asked respectfully. Those who are not of our race are bound to have different intentions. The Roth Empire has never had a truly reliable ally. We are just a bunch of bad friends who make use of each other. André laughed mockingly. However, I am a little curious about who is stirring up the situation. Is it Alex and Irina? Or is it those restless fellows in Chaos City? According to our investigation, Alex and Irina did appear on the Fear Islands that day, and Alex used a strange lightning magic to kill Bar Hill. However, they should have gone to rescue the elves, and those elves were brought back to Chaos City. There is no evidence that they are related to the battle between the Abyss Demons and the Flaming Demons, that official answered. Since they are on the Demon Islands, given Irina's character, how could she not get involved? No evidence is the most suspicious evidence. André sneered. That official was stunned. After some deliberation, he said, then, should we inform the Flaming Demons and the Abyss Demons? If the two races stop fighting, the main war alliance might be reformed. Since there is no evidence, how are you going to tell them? André turned around and looked at the minister mockingly. Furthermore, the two clans have already fought to such an extent that it's meaningless to know who started it. They only need to know that their clan leader died in the hands of the other party, and that's enough for them to fight for a few years. That official lowered his head in fear. The Roth Empire doesn't need allies. As long as the giant dragons don't leave Dragon Island, this world will be mine sooner or later, André said coldly. At the Elven Embassy in Chaos City. This is the letter that the chief wants me to pass to you. Our family is already at the crossroads of destruction. He hopes that you can make the right choice. Ingve handed a letter to Blower before leaving with a serious expression. Blower looked at the familiar handwriting on the letter. He stood at the door for a while before turning around and closing the door. There was an oil lamp on the desk in the room. There were two beds, one big and one small, in the bedroom. Anna was already asleep on the small bed. Blower walked to the desk softly and tapped on the letter. A faint golden light flashed, and the layer of golden light on the envelope disappeared. He opened the envelope and took out the faint yellow letter inside. Blower, I haven't heard from you for a long time. 15 minutes later, Blower put down the letter in his hand. His brows furrowed slightly as he fell into deep thought. The wind outside the window suddenly blew open, and a gust of cold wind blew in. Blower waved his hand, and the window closed again. He crumpled the letter into a ball, and it fell onto the table as countless shreds. A letter from home, a commission. The survival of his family was on his shoulders. A self-deprecating smile appeared on Blower's face. Since when had he become so capable? He was the useless son who had brought shame to his father. Elven territory, Brewster family territory. In a castle, Elliot looked at Sally, who was wearing a set of extravagant clothes, and said in a low voice, "Sally, you should listen to High Priestess Helena and cancel your engagement with Blower. The Elven Queen doesn't need a husband. This will only dilute your authority." Sally turned to look at Elliot and said, "Is that so? I remember that father was the one who made this engagement for me. You said that Blower was a very good choice, and that I would be able to find happiness if I were to marry him." Elliot choked upon hearing this, and an awkward expression appeared on his face as he said, That was because our family was in a difficult situation, and we had no choice but to make you marry Blower. He's just a weak and useless guy, how could he be worthy of you? We'll go to the Billy family tomorrow to cancel this engagement. Before you officially become the princess, you have to draw a clear line between you and them. If they dare to resist, the High Priestess will help us destroy their family. They're already on the list to be removed. Sally looked at Elliot with a calm expression and said, "No, I won't cancel this engagement. I think Blower is a brave elf, and I'm willing to marry him." A hint of fury appeared on Elliot's face, and his voice also became heavier as he said, "Sally, for the sake of our family, you have to cancel your engagement with Blower. He's an elf from a completely different world from you. I don't need you to make decisions for me." Sally's voice also became cold. "You." Elliot raised his hand. Sally looked at him coldly, and said in a cold voice, "I'll be the Elven princess in 3 days. Father, remember your position. I won't cancel this engagement." Elliot's hand trembled slightly, and he lowered it in the end. Sally walked past him and disappeared through the door. Chapter 1402. Who am I? Where am I? This floor. Why is it so familiar? Camilla opened her eyes. Her head was a little dizzy, and she looked around in confusion. Her gaze landed on the floor, and she suddenly felt that it was familiar. Then, some memories from last night came flooding back. She, who couldn't sleep, seemed to have come to the restaurant to drink with Meg. Then, Irina was also there, so she ended up drinking with Irina. Drinking. Camilla patted her head, which was still a little dizzy. The feeling of dizziness after a hangover was indeed uncomfortable. In the past, she would only have a small glass of red wine before sleeping, but last night, she seemed to have drunk countless glasses of beer. Wait. Did I do something strange when I was drinking? Camilla's eyes gradually widened. She seemed to have eaten grass. Tender green lettuce leaves wrapped around freshly roasted beef cubes. Oh my God. As a vampire aristocrat, she actually ate grass. And she even took the initiative to eat it. Camilla wanted to find a hole to hide in. This was too humiliating. If this spread out, she felt that she would probably lose something like her face. However, this floor still looked very familiar. Camilla's gaze was fixed on the floor again. She suddenly remembered that she had completely lost her memory after getting drunk last night. It was probably what humans called fragmentation. Then, she vaguely remembered that she was carried up. Could it be Boss? Camilla's expression became nervous. She lifted the blanket to take a look. Her clothes were still intact. Other than some creases from sleeping, there were no signs of them being untied or torn. He really can't do it. Camilla was relieved, but she was inexplicably a little disappointed. She already remembered why the floor here was so familiar. It was because she had slept on this floor last night in the same position, at the same angle, sleeping on the same floor. Bastard, you actually made this countess sleep on the floor again. Camilla sat up angrily. Just as she was about to vent her anger on Meg, who was lying on the bed, she met two pairs of blue eyes. Big Sister Camilla, you're awake, Amy, who was lying on the bed, said to Camilla with a smile. You're sleeping pretty soundly even on the floor. Irina leaned lazily against the headboard with a smile on her face. Camilla was stunned for a while before she subconsciously asked, why can you lie on his bed? Because good-looking people can lie on the bed, Irina said with a smile. Then why am I lying on the floor? Camilla asked in confusion. Then, she suddenly realized something and her expression changed slightly. She gritted her teeth and said, that guy actually thinks that I should be lying on the floor. But Big Sister Camilla, why are you sleeping on the floor of our room again? Amy asked in confusion. Irina and Camilla looked at Amy at the same time. Camilla was a little flustered. That night, she couldn't bear to recall it. Irina's gaze had a hint of danger. It also meant that this wasn't the first time. It seemed like this wasn't the first time such a late-night invitation had happened. Moreover, it had even progressed to the room. Knock knock. There was a knock on the door, followed by Meg's voice. Are you up? It's breakfast time. I'm suddenly so hungry. Let's go eat breakfast. Camilla got up from the floor nimbly, tugged at her skirt, and quickly walked to the door. What is she feeling guilty about? Irina narrowed her eyes slightly and was a little curious. Camilla opened the door and saw Meg standing at the door. She glared at him, walked past him, and even raised her leg to step on his foot. Meg retracted his foot in time and looked at Camilla's back in confusion. Was this woman so scary when she woke up? He was only here to call them for breakfast. When Meg turned around, a pillow flew at his head and hit his face. He reached out and took the pillow away. Irina stood in front of him and looked at him with a faint smile. How many times has this happened? Leniency to those who confess, severity to those who resist. Amy stuck her head out from behind and said in an old-fashioned manner, shit. Meg panicked. He didn't expect his backyard to catch fire so quickly. He thought he had arranged it well, but he didn't expect his cleverness to backfire on him. It was most likely that the incident of Camilla staying over last time was exposed. It's the second time. The last time she was drunk, I also arranged for her to sleep on the floor. Meg confessed. Anyway, he really didn't do anything, so he had a clear conscience. Irina stared into Meg's eyes for a while, then put away the folding chair in her hand. She stretched and asked, "What do you want to eat for breakfast?" Meg looked at Irina's graceful curves under her tight pajamas and heaved a sigh of relief. As expected, he was lenient to those who confessed. He smiled and said, "As long as it's something I know how to cook, I'll make it for you." Irina's lips curled into a smile. She thought for a while and said, "A sweet tofu pudding, a Yangzhou fried rice, a bowl of soy milk with a youtiao." "I want the same." Amy raised her little hand. "Okay, you two go wash up first." Meg nodded with a smile, then turned and went downstairs. Meg walked to the kitchen door and saw Camilla standing at the door with a glass of water in her hand, thinking about life with her hair down. "Are you okay?" Meg looked at her and asked. Last night, when he heard her talk about how she was forced to marry twice in a row, he felt a little more pity for this countess who looked strong on the outside. When Camilla heard the sound, she suddenly raised her head and looked at Meg. She said a little nervously, "What should we do?" "Irina knows that we slept together." "Meg?" "No, how did we sleep together?" "Miss, you have to be responsible for what you say. You can't just insult my innocence." Meg's eyelids twitched. Was she so scary early in the morning? Camilla also realized that there was something wrong with her expression. She quickly waved her hand and said, "No. I mean, she knows that we slept in the same room. I'm a pure vampire. I'm still a pure man." Meg rolled his eyes. He was also a little convinced by this girl's thinking. He reached out and pressed down on her trembling shoulders. He looked into her eyes and said, "Remember, nothing happened between us. You just slept on the floor. So, if you don't say anything, and she doesn't say anything, no one will know." Camilla looked at Meg and gradually calmed down. Then, she said a little angrily, "Scumbag." "Huh?" Meg looked at Camilla strangely. She slept on the floor. How was he a scumbag? Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1403. Why is Irina on your bed? Camilla asked him back with an indignant look in her eyes. Although Irina was indeed as beautiful as a fairy, she was also as pretty as a flower. Why was she sleeping on the floor, but Irina could sleep on the bed? Furthermore, you slept with Alex's woman. Aren't you afraid that he'll chop you up? Camilla's voice lowered a little. She felt that she had suddenly grasped something important, and even her expression became a little nervous. "What do you mean I slept with Alex's woman?" "I haven't slept with her yet." Meg rolled his eyes. Furthermore, how was Alex going to chop him up? Was he going to make him castrate himself? Looking at Camilla's mysterious expression, Meg could roughly guess what she was thinking. He helplessly said, "Princess Irina has been staying in the restaurant for many days. Because she doesn't have a suitable place to stay in Chaos City now, she's staying in the restaurant temporarily. Considering her status, she's sleeping in the master bedroom, and I'm sleeping in the small bedroom next door." Camilla was a little confused. Why didn't she know about this? "Boss, you guys are up." Just then, Gina came downstairs with a yawn. She looked at Camilla, who was standing at the kitchen door, and was a little surprised. "Big sister Camilla, you're here so early too." "Gina, is Princess Irina staying in the restaurant?" Meg asked Gina. "Yeah. Aren't Princess Irina and Amy staying in your room?" Gina nodded before saying, "Boss, if you feel lonely staying alone, you can move into my room." Camilla, who was a little embarrassed, glared at Meg again, and said, "Scumbag." "Mag? What could he do?" The mermaid princess from Lantist was just so hospitable. Irina brought Amy downstairs. Mia and the others also arrived one after another. They served piping hot congee with pork and century egg to the cleaners. After everyone had breakfast, Meg prepared to send Amy to school. "Boss, I want to take a long leave." Shirley caught up with Meg and said to him at the door. Meg looked at Shirley in surprise. The Night Elves and Irina were both in Chaos City, so why did he have to apply for leave? There are some family matters that need to be settled at home. Shirley glanced at Anna, who was standing not far away, with an apologetic look on her face. She then looked at Meg and said, "I can only leave Anna to you." Meg saw that Shirley didn't want to say more, so he didn't ask further. He pondered for a while and nodded. "Okay, I'll take good care of Anna. Take care of yourself." "All right." Shirley nodded. She turned and walked towards Anna. She squatted down and hugged her gently, whispering something into her ear. Then, she stood up and said a few words to Irina in private. Finally, she bade farewell to everyone and left directly. "I'll wait for you to come back." "Please, you have to come back," Anna said with reddened eyes as she chased Shirley to the door, and saw that Shirley had already mounted her horse. "Don't worry. I'll come back. I definitely will." Shirley turned and looked at Anna with a beautiful smile before galloping away on her horse. "Miss Shirley, are you leaving again?" Constantine rushed out from the group, and called out to Shirley's back. However, she had already gone far away, and only her back view was left. What a sad story. Meg looked at Constantine with pity as he rode the carriage to send Amy to school. The Wind Forest was going through a transformation. He had already found out about Shirley's, or rather, Blower's, identity from the Grey Temple's information. As the young master of the Billy family, he was also engaged to Sally. No matter how amazing he was, he naturally had his reasons for choosing to return to the Wind Forest at such a turbulent time. Blower chose to go back, and he respected his choice. However, since he had become a member of the Night Elves, they would definitely meet again in the near future. Or rather, they would fight on the same side. On the way to send Amy to school, the little fellow hugged his waist and curiously asked, "Father, do you like Mother or Big Sister Camilla? Or Big Sister Gloria? If you have to choose between them, who would you choose?" "Only children make choices." Meg smiled scornfully. "As for me, other than your mother, do I dare to choose anyone else? If I choose anyone else, I might be beaten to death," Amy said after thinking for a while. "It's good that you know. Don't use the word again so casually next time," Meg said seriously with a sigh. "Oh," Amy replied, and then said, "but Big Sister Camilla really slept on the floor again." All right. Let's not talk about this anymore." Meg nodded helplessly. He sent Amy to school and returned to the restaurant. Not long after the morning service ended, the doorbell rang. Meg, who was about to have a cup of tea and rest, got up and walked to the door. When he opened the door, he was shocked by the hundreds of lava demons standing outside. Meg's gaze landed on Sargeras, who was standing at the front, and he asked, "Director Sargeras, is the Burning Legion recruiting again?" Sargeras looked at Meg and said, "Mr. Mack, they are all my people, and also members of the Burning Legion. From today onwards, please take care of them, boss." Meg also noticed that there were men, women, old, and young among these lava demons. It seemed that Sargeras had indeed brought all the lava demons to Chaos City. However, the lava demons, who used to be so powerful, were only left with such a group of old and weak soldiers. It was indeed a little sad. Moreover, Meg felt that there was something different about Sargeras. Apart from the fact that he had broken through to the 9th tier, there seemed to be some changes in his aura. He probably looked more domineering. "You're too kind." Meg nodded with a smile. He seemed to have already seen a group of Laji Rujiamo enthusiasts. Sargeras had told him bluntly about the benefits of Rujiamo to the lava demons before. Sargeras was straightforward and reliable. Meg admired him very much. If Laji Rujiamo could help their declining race rise again as the Burning Legion, he would be very willing to help them within his ability. However, if you want to buy Rujiamos in a group, you don't have to come in so many people. That way, it will be more convenient for you to buy, and it won't affect the other customers in the queue, Meg reminded them again. Otherwise, the restaurant would be exclusively for the Burning Legion in the future. Alright, at most 10 people in the queue in the future. Sargeras nodded with a silly smile. After getting Mr. Mack's approval, the rise of the Burning Legion was no longer a fantasy. After sending the Burning Legion away, Meg heard the sound of iron being forged next door, and suddenly remembered those machines that he had ordered from Mumbai. Now that the Night Elves had nothing to do, he might as well let them work in time. They could also be self-reliant and earn some military expenses for the Burning Legion. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 1404. Mr. Mack, you're here. Mumbai walked out of the smithing room when he heard the commotion. He wiped the sweat off his face with a towel, and smiled at Meg. "The machine is almost done. When do you need it?" "I'll get someone to send it over for you." "If it's already done, then the sooner, the better. Once the machine is installed, the factory can start operations," Meg said with a smile. He was very satisfied with Mumbai's progress. "What kind of machine are these parts going to be assembled into?" "It doesn't look simple," Mumbai asked curiously. "A spinning machine. However, it's driven by a steam engine, so it's much more efficient than manual spinning." Meg smiled. The steam engine had already been sent over from the hill. After the spinning machine was installed, the factory could start operations. Spinning machine. Mumbai scratched his head. He didn't quite understand what Meg meant. The two of them discussed the delivery of the parts for a while. After confirming that all the parts would be delivered over the next 2 days, Meg returned to the restaurant. Irina went to the factory to train the Night Elves, and Gina followed Mia and the rest to the ice cream shop. Hence, only Meg was left in the restaurant. He made a cup of green tea, brought it upstairs, and placed it in front of the study table. Meg opened the box that Roland gave him, and continued to look through the information. The threat of the Demon Islands was temporarily removed, which basically met Meg's expectations. At least, they wouldn't be able to band together to create trouble before the next peace talk. However, the demons weren't the only race that liked to fight. The most powerful race, the Roth Empire, was still getting restless. The orcs were quickly integrating and planning to create trouble during the peace talk. The forest trolls were no longer satisfied with staying in the dark shadow forest to rot, and were planning to expand their territory. Meg knew the Roth Empire the best. Although the situation of Johnson and Sean fighting for the throne was getting more and more tense, as long as Andre was alive, the Roth Empire would be an iron bucket that could not be torn apart. Killing Andre was a good way to split the Roth Empire apart, but Andre was probably the most difficult person to kill in this world. The Magus Tower was not far from the royal palace, and no one knew how many 10th-tier powerhouses were hiding around him. In the past 100 years, the Roth Empire had developed at an unimaginable speed. Both the number of 10th-tier knights and 10th-tier magic casters had reached a terrifying number. Although humans didn't have powerful physical talents, their outstanding learning ability, continuous optimization of cultivation methods, and large-scale cultivation system allowed the number of powerhouses in the Roth Empire to increase rapidly in the short span of 100 years. In order to break through to level 10, apart from proper cultivation, talent was of utmost importance. There was ultimately a limit to the number. However, the Roth Empire's large number of mid-range and high-end combat power that had been neglected by the various races was an existence that was enough to make the various races fearful. Alex used to be a high-ranking officer in the Roth Empire's military, so Meg knew clearly from his memories how many 6th-tier to 9th-tier knights and magic casters the Roth Empire had. This large number of mid-range and high-end combat power was enough to lead the Roth Empire's cavalry to flatten any race. As for why the orcs were able to fight the Roth Empire on par with them at the border, what they didn't know was that the various military districts of the Roth Empire had been secretly rotating every year for the past few decades. The border war with the orcs that had never stopped was just a practical training ground for the Roth Empire. After Andrei took over, he had been very patient and restrained in his foreign policy, and focused on his development. When the Crassus fireball blasted the giant dragon down from the sky, and Alex's longsword chopped off the dragon's head, even the giant dragon probably didn't know that the once weak humans now had the ability to challenge them, the overlords of the sky. As a human, Meg felt gratified and honored. The survival history of humans was a sad one. Just like all the weak races, some perished in the long river of history, and some became weaker and weaker, and became vassals. Humans had paid a huge price to survive the racial war and have a place to live. Only when they were strong enough could they be truly respected and survive in this cruel world. Until now, Andrei had shown all the qualities and abilities that a qualified king needed. Even if some of his methods might be stained with blood and conspiracies, the Roth Empire already had the ability to resist all wars. However, what made Meg uneasy was that after having such powerful abilities, this aging king no longer seemed to be satisfied with just defending one area. Instead, he was preparing to embark on the path of conquering the entire world. From being a victim back then to being a perpetrator, what was the difference between this and those races that had harmed humans back then? 100 years had passed. To ordinary humans, it was a cruel thing to start a war where ordinary humans were destined to lose for the king's ambition and old grudges. Even if humans ruled this world in the end, no one knew how many years it would take for the scars caused by this war to heal, and how many innocent races would be wiped out in the war. Meg hated war. He hated the world that was about to sink into the flames of war. He wanted to spread the model of Chaos City to the entire world. If all the races could open up their borders and coexist peacefully, the sword of Damocles hanging over this world would really disappear. As long as Andrei is alive, the Roth Empire is indeed invincible. Meg closed the information in his hands and sighed softly. However, once Andrei died suddenly, whether it was Sean or Josh who took over, it might speed up the development of the current situation. These two were not peace-loving people, and Sean had long been itching to wipe out the orcs. After setting the information about the Roth Empire aside, Meg picked up the information about the orcs to read. The orcs were the ones who had the deepest conflict and needed to be resolved the most urgently. The orcs were also very powerful. Although they were made up of many scattered tribes, they could quickly gather and work together in times of war with their totems and beliefs. Meg's next target was the orcs. Once the Falk tribe was controlled by the August tribe, the orcs would become a race that was completely controlled by the main battle tribe, and would pose a serious threat to the dwarves immediately. The internal integration of the Falk tribe had already reached the final stage. Most of the people who were loyal to the previous chief were locked up in the dungeon or killed. They would publicly execute the chief's son 10 days later, and officially crown Gary as the new chief of the tribe. 10 days, Meg murmured. That killer who was trying hard to find his direction shouldn't know about this. Chapter 1405. Connie, what's wrong with you? Didn't I ask you to go back to the restaurant to get an apron? Why are you sweating so much? Mia asked in surprise as she handed the ice cream in her hand to a child and looked at Connie, who walked in with sweat all over his face. Elizabeth and the others also looked at Connie strangely. Connie said anxiously, "Did you guys know that the restaurant disappeared? I walked all the way to the end of the square, but I couldn't find the restaurant. I looked back and forth many times, but I still couldn't find it. I only saw a shop that sold pots. Did our restaurant disappear? It's gone." Everyone was slightly surprised when they heard this. How could the restaurant disappear? Also, the blacksmith shop next to the restaurant didn't sell pots. "Connie, didn't you turn left after leaving the restaurant?" Barbara asked after thinking for a moment. "Didn't I turn left after leaving the restaurant?" Connie nodded matter-of-factly. Everyone looked at Connie with complicated expressions. "I'm sorry, Connie. I shouldn't have given you this task. It might be a little difficult for you," Yabamiya said apologetically. "It's hard to imagine how difficult it must be for you to go out and deliver food." Barbara looked sad. "So, delivering food once a day is indeed the limit." Raina chuckled, and everyone smiled. "Did I get the direction wrong again?" Connie tapped his fingers and blushed a little. "Why don't we have durian pizza for lunch today?" Meg came out of the study and went downstairs as he muttered to himself. He hadn't tried the durian pizza that he learned about last night, so he didn't know if Amy and the others would be able to accept the taste. As for the official launch, Meg planned to delay it for a day or two. He had to think about how to launch such a heavy food. Should he set up an exclusive area like the stinky tofu, or should he completely open it to the public? Meg had just come downstairs when Phyllis and Camilla arrived. They were in charge of preparing the ingredients, so they always came early. "Boss." Phyllis greeted Meg with a smile. Camilla, on the other hand, glared at Meg before walking past him into the kitchen. Meg raised his eyebrows. He didn't know what he had done to provoke this lady. She was the one who came to his door to drink. The one who got her drunk was Irina. The one who tricked her into eating grass was also Irina. He even kindly carried her upstairs and made a bed for her to sleep on. She couldn't find such a good man anywhere else, right? "Boss, did you offend Big Sister Camilla?" Phyllis asked softly as she looked at Camilla, who was chopping the vegetables, while putting on her apron. "Maybe she's a little heaty." "Eating more vegetables will help reduce the heat," Meg said with a smile. His voice was just loud enough for Camilla to hear. "This fellow, he must have seen me eating grass yesterday." Camilla blushed. A cucumber was instantly chopped into pieces. Meg glanced at the cucumber who had met a tragic end, and immediately shut his mouth. He walked past Camilla carefully with his back facing her. The durian in the corner of the fridge had already been delivered. It was round and plump, golden in color. It was indeed a very high-quality durian. Meg opened the fridge door, and a strong durian fragrance was released. "What's that strange smell?" Phyllis, who was about to start chopping vegetables, looked around in confusion. The strange smell that suddenly appeared rushed into her nose. It was a little pungent at first. "It stinks." Camilla covered her nose and her face turned green. She retreated to the kitchen door and looked at Meg, who was standing beside the fridge with a round thing full of spikes in his hand. She asked in horror, "What are you holding in your hand?" "Durian, a very expensive and delicious fruit," Meg said frankly. As an evolved durian fan, he couldn't help but drool when he smelled this fragrance. Camilla kept retreating from the kitchen. After the smell was blocked, she let go of her nose and gasped for air. She still looked at the strange-looking durian in Meg's hand with a lingering fear. As a noble vampire with a strong obsession with cleanliness, she absolutely couldn't tolerate stinky smells. For example, stinky tofu. Every time she smelled that smell, she would feel like vomiting. Therefore, whenever Meg was about to start making stinky tofu, she would leave the kitchen in advance. However, the smell of this durian today was not inferior to the stinky tofu. Just one sniff was enough to make her feel like she was suffocating. Although Phyllis's reaction wasn't as exaggerated as Camilla's, from the way she tried to control her expression and gradually frowned, she also couldn't immediately accept the smell of the durian. After a period of time, she had already accepted the smell of the stinky tofu. Especially after tasting it herself, her resistance to that smell had completely disappeared. However, this fruit with the same pungent smell, was it really as delicious as Meg said? This made her somewhat doubtful. Meg had already expected the reaction of the two. He could imagine the reaction of the customers after smelling this smell. Indeed, treating this new product with caution was the right choice. There would be an extreme contrast between liking and disliking. This is an important ingredient used to make a new product called durian. Let's have this for lunch today. Meg smiled. Eat this. Camilla's eyes widened. She felt that the situation was a little bad. She couldn't stand the smell alone. If they still wanted her to eat it, they might as well kill her. Meg glanced at Camilla and placed the durian on the side of the stove. With a twist of his hand, the shell of the durian was broken open, revealing 2 full pieces of durian meat. The fragrance of the durian became more intense. The plump durian meat was ripe just right. How do we eat this? Phyllis was already used to this smell, so she made her way over to Mag with a curious expression. She was quite interested in this new product that Mag was talking about, as he always came up with some interesting ideas, but he was always able to come up with some amazingly delicious dishes. Meg took a spoon and directly scooped a big spoonful of durian meat and passed it to Phyllis. He smiled and said, "You can eat it directly." Eat it directly. Phyllis took the spoon with some doubt. She hesitated and didn't know how to eat it. It's sticky, yellow, and soft. This terrible appearance and shape, and there's also a strange smell. Can it really be eaten? Camilla stood at the door and looked at the spoonful of durian meat in Phyllis's hand. She thought firmly in her heart, even if I die, I will definitely not eat this durian or any other durian-related food. Chapter 1406. Yes, you can eat it directly, just like eating ice cream cake. Meg said to Phyllis in a gentle tone with a smile, just like a poisonous snake tempting Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. Phyllis still felt that this smell was a little strange, but after smelling it for a while, it didn't seem so pungent anymore. However, she still couldn't describe what kind of smell it was. It was very special, and different from all the smells she had smelled in the past. After hearing Meg's words, Phyllis hesitated for a moment, and looked up at Meg, only to meet his gentle eyes. It was as if everything would melt into water in his eyes, and a blush instantly appeared on her face. She immediately stuffed the spoonful of durian into her mouth. Phyllis actually ate it. Camilla, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen, stared at Phyllis in shock. She couldn't even stand the smell, and Phyllis actually put that strange durian into her mouth. Oh! Phyllis was also stunned. She had only planned to lick a little bit to roughly taste it so that she wouldn't embarrass Meg, but she didn't expect that she would actually put the entire spoonful of durian into her mouth in a moment of nervousness. However, the expected strange taste didn't explode in her mouth. Instead, a sweet taste gradually blossomed. She gently pursed her lips, and the durian melted in her mouth. Its delicate texture was not inferior to that of tofu pudding in the slightest. What followed was a mellow sweetness that instantly filled all of her taste buds. That sweetness was different from that of syrup, and it seemed to have constructed a delicious seal between the two. Then, it suddenly slapped onto her body. She was suddenly able to accept the smell of durian. This wasn't a strange smell, this was an extreme fragrance. The fragrance was so rich that it was pungent, but after tasting it in her mouth, the smell inside and outside her body seemed to have reached a certain balance, as if she had added a filter to her body, and she suddenly felt this fragrance. She swallowed the durian, but the fragrance of the durian still lingered on the tip of her tongue, unwilling to dissipate for a long time. Phyllis closed her eyes, and subconsciously licked her lips with her tongue, and a satisfied smile appeared on her face. Bean Sprout, have you eaten this? Irina walked into the kitchen, covered her nose, and walked out. She looked at Phyllis, who was still savoring the aftertaste, with a despondent expression. Ah! Phyllis opened her eyes, and saw Irina standing at the door with a look of disbelief on her face as well as the spoon in her hand. She hurriedly wiped the yellow durian residue that was still hanging by the side of her mouth, and shook her head as she said, "And no, Princess, you've misunderstood." Irina sighed, and looked at Phyllis with pity. Although the night elves are indeed in a difficult situation now, you don't have to force yourself like this. How am I going to face you like this? Princess, I really didn't eat. All right, I'll pretend that I didn't see anything today. Remember to brush your teeth. You still have to cut vegetables for the guests later. Irina waved her hand and then glared at Meg. Why didn't you stop her? Meg had an innocent look on his face. What's going on? Irina did not give them a chance to explain. She turned and walked towards the stairs as she said, "I'm tired. I'll take a nap. The three of you can eat slowly. Call me when it's time to eat." Then, the three of them were left looking at each other. Ahem, ahem. She doesn't understand the situation. Let's just pretend that nothing happened. Meg coughed dryly to ease the awkwardness. Then, he looked at Phyllis, and asked, "How is it, Phyllis? What do you think of the durian taste?" Camilla also looked at Phyllis curiously. The feeling of eating such a sticky and strange thing should be terrible, right? I've never eaten such a fruit before. It's shockingly delicious. The rich aroma, delicate texture, and sweet taste are all unbelievable. It can be said that this is the most delicious fruit I've ever eaten. Even all the fruits in the wind forest can't compare to it, Phyllis said sincerely. Now that she smelled the fragrance in the air, her throat couldn't help but move, and her body was already starting to want another bite. How is that possible? Camilla, who was expecting Phyllis to say that she had a terrible experience, was stunned. She looked at Phyllis in disbelief. Phyllis turned to look at Camilla with a smile, and said, "Big sister Camilla, do you want to try it? This durian is really delicious. It's just like stinky tofu. You can only truly understand its deliciousness after tasting it." I refuse. Camilla crossed her arms. Stinky tofu was also something that she could not accept. No matter how many people said that it was delicious, it was still something that she did not want to try. As for this so-called durian, it was also a food of the same level as stinky tofu to her. She could not even think about tasting it. Meg saw that Camilla was indeed not interested in the durian, and did not want to force her. He placed the durian on the workbench, and turned on the regional odor isolation system in the kitchen. At the same time, he purified the air in the kitchen. Then, he looked at Camilla, and said, "You can come in now. I've already controlled the odor to the area around the workbench." Camilla reached into the kitchen, grabbed a handful of air, and sniffed it. After making sure that there was no strange smell, she returned to the kitchen and continued to prepare the ingredients with Phyllis. Meg shook his head helplessly. As expected, durian was something that those who loved it would praise for its fragrance, and those who hated it would complain about its stench. However, the durian pizza still had to be made. Otherwise, how would the world know about the deliciousness of durian? He took out pieces of durian meat, removed the cores, and beat them into a paste. Then, he took out various ingredients and began to make the durian pizza. Phyllis looked at Meg from time to time. She was a little curious. The durian meat was already so delicious, so why did it still need to be processed? And what was a pizza? Meg put the prepared durian pizza into the oven. After a while, Mia, Amy, and the rest all returned to the dining room. They were all looking forward to it when they heard that Meg was going to make a new dish for lunch. Amy walked into the kitchen and pointed at the durian shell that was still on the workbench, and asked curiously, "Father, what's that hedgehog-like thing?" "That's the durian shell," Meg, who was making the tofu pudding, replied without turning his head. Durian. Nostalgia. Who would be nostalgic for such an ugly and strange thing? Amy was a little perplexed. Phyllis gulped and said softly, "Those who have eaten it will be nostalgic." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.